I am calling this meeting to order at 7:32 p.m. So we'll start with roll call.
With 23 members present, a simple majority is 13 and 2/3 majority is 16.
Beautiful, thank you. We'll move to section 3, introductions and reports. There are no messages from the student body president, so we'll move to the report from the executive branch. Vice President Fawn.
Good evening, everyone. I hope your week has been going well with midterms and student fees last week. Just a few reports today, pretty short. So today, President Howard, Director Fritz, Director Arns, and I went to the K-Board Student Advisory Council meeting. We discussed our elections across all the K-Board institutions and the SGAs, legislation within the Kansas House. Additionally, we went to K-Board's Academic Affairs Committees, where they discussed open education resources, K-Board procedure for reverse transfers. They also approved 2 new WSU programs, and they also discussed the unified tuition increase program. This week, we met with Dr. Terry Hall, Senior Vice President of Operations and Finances, David Miller, for our monthly meeting. In addition, tomorrow we will meet with Provost Lounsbury and have a couple more meetings this week. Next week we'll also have meetings with several deans. Not next week, the week after, the week we get back from spring break, we'll meet with several deans. So Dean Fred from Applied Studies, we set a meeting with her on the 27th. On the Monday that we come back, the 24th, we are planning to meet with the Dean of Fine Arts. In addition, we reached out to Dean Gannon from the School of Business to set up a meeting also. So pay attention to your emails. I will be sending out more information to any senators that may be interested in participating with information on how you can join those meetings as they come up. For Student Body Treasurer Wong, we had our student fees process, and that is done. It will be presented when we come back from spring break. So any questions related to student fees can be you can ask her, and she is also in the back right now. If you want to speak to her after Senate. For our Chief of Staff Westbrook, he is finalizing the meeting minutes for our Finance Commission for student fees, and still updating the record in the SGA Shared Drive. For Director of Outreach Wynn, she is currently working on tabling events to promote our SGA elections. In addition to that, based on the poll that was put on our Instagram, Coffee Days won that, so we will be bringing them back onto campus for the elections event. She will also be tabling for WSU Day, so if you please reach out to her or any of the leadership for the sign-up link. For our sorry, give me 1 second. For our undergraduate advocate Wassinger, she currently has 7 cases, 1 parking and 6 academic appeals. The Accessibility and Disability Pride Task Force has met 3 times. Each member has weighed in onto the legislation seen on the floor in some portions of the drafting process. The Sunflower featured the task force in the recent diversity edition as well. Lastly, she has been appointed as the student government representative for the university's ADA/504 coordinator search. Finally, President Howard and I are visiting Community Service Board as for one of the SJ visits tomorrow. I will send out more information to GroupMe if you're interested in attending. At that meeting, we'll talk about our SJ elections, encourage students to vote, in addition to talking a little bit more about what our SJ does. But I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to report from Speaker of the Senate. So you should have all received the invitation for this year's banquet, A Taste of Spring. Very cute, I know. It's from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on April 27th. This will be an opportunity to celebrate this year's accomplishments, as well as give out awards and those kinds of things that you should have already filled out. Please fill it out ASAP if you haven't. I'll give you the Bill of the Year award form probably tomorrow morning. I'll have some things to remove, and Additionally, some votes to get through tonight to see if those qualify for consideration for that as well. So also last week, the Finance Commission voted and adopted the budget for fiscal year 26. Exciting stuff. The student fees process is a 3-week process back to us. It will begin on March 26th and end on April 9th. I expect all of you to make every effort to be prepared and to ask any questions you have about the process before we begin. The process doesn't really give a lot of leeway in terms of questions or late-minute questions on week 2 or 3. Week 1 is your only time to pull items for student fees consideration and to change those items. So we will be utilizing the committee of the whole time on March 26th to answer any questions you may have to ensure that this process goes as smoothly as possible. Additionally, due to the nature of student fees, it is a priority for me to ensure that this is an accessible conversation, as you all are probably learning about student fees and have never gone through student fees before, as most of you are new. This public forum will also be available for any student fees entity to share anything before the Senate when we go into our considerations. And all of these meetings will be live streamed, so keep that in mind. So as well for that, the spring break, yay! March 7th, spring break next week. Oh goodness, there'll be no committee or Senate during this time on the 19th because of this. Enjoy this time off. This would be a great time to really catch up on some sleep debt if you have any. And to get any legislation or those kinds of things or initiatives done before we meet back for March 26th. And then keep in mind as well that April 4th is the last day for legislation to be submitted and to get its first read, committee, second read. That does not include it being tabled or being anything happening to it. So please do that as a last possible time for April 4th. So get it in before then, please. I will not consider it after that, obviously, because it will not be given its 2 necessary reads and committee vote. But consider that date, April 4th, while you're, resting and doing things on spring break, to see if hey, is that something that I really want to get this legislation done this session? I'm not sure which of you are staying or coming back in the next session, but to those of you who are coming back next session, it might be a consideration of, do I do this next session or do I keep doing it this session, et cetera, et cetera. Have those important conversations with yourself. Also get your homework done and all that before you do spring cleaning and resting and whatever. But yeah, that's really all I have. Last week was a really busy week, and this week will hopefully be a little bit chiller. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to 3.4, Report from Government Oversight, Chairperson Bobbitt.
I'm just going to echo the sentiments of the speaker. Please take a look at the student fees process. A lot went on, especially on deliberations, so make sure you are as informed as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to 3.5, Report from Academic Affairs, Chairperson Grajeda.
No report.
Thank you. We'll move on to 3.6, Report from Diversity, Empowerment, and Inclusion, Chairperson Haynes.
Yes, report. So this week has been a very quiet, busy, a very quiet week for me. I've been busy being a student, so my SGA stuff has been on the back burner, but I do have some agency updates for y'all. So earlier, I'd like to say, actually no, last week, Black Student Union had their Women's History Brunch with women leaders on campus, faculty and staff. Outside of the student engagement and belonging realm, it was a really nice thing. They had some good food, y'all. They met with the Multicultural Club at Northeast High School a couple weeks back, so that was pretty good. They talked about the importance of racial diversity and stuff like that. And then they had their general body meeting yesterday, recapping the Big 12 Conference on Black Student Government. Moving on to our Asian Student Conference, they had their cooking competition last week. It was some pretty good food. If y'all check their Instagram, you might see some certain SGA members chowing down. And then they had their general body meeting yesterday, talking about different Asian dances. For Halo, they had their Empower Her conference, which was this past weekend. It was a pretty good, well-attended conference, and all those who attended had a great time. They're preparing for Si Se Puede Day. I'll get the date for y'all next week, or not next week, next time. We're back here. And then 2 weeks ago, they had their professional panel with mocktails, so that was also a pretty good event. Our International Student Union, or ISU, they had their second general body meeting last week. ISU, I believe, has finished their clothing drive. Student engagement and belonging had their iftar night yesterday. That was a pretty good success. A lot of multicultural organizations were tabling and stuff like that. International Student Union, along with the Motor Board, they are doing the Belonging Gala on April 16th. Also, Interfest is back. Woo! It is April 9th, so save y'all's coins for that day. Y'all, the food is good every single time. I don't think I have to tell y'all. Save y'all money for Interfest. ISU is also hosting their own iftar banquet on March 23rd, and then they're also preparing for their badminton tournament.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Chairperson Haynes? Seeing none, we'll move to 3.7, report from Student Services, Chairperson Adriana Owens.
The Campus Parking Improvement Act passed through Student Services with a unanimous vote and will be seen back on the Senate floor the 26th. Once this bill passes, plans are for Vice President Fawn and me to meet with the Parking and Transportation Advisory Committee, along with other parking-related individuals, to discuss our proposed changes. Our committee continues to work on our housing legislation pending responses from university heads, and other initiatives like Hatch and undergraduate advocates' work regarding amending the Student Bill of Rights to enshrine 504 and 88A protections for students are in the works. If you have any questions, please let me know or other individuals I mentioned. I'm open for questions.
Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to 3.8, report from the Central Office. Central Office.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Spring break is next week, so the Student Governance Office will close on Friday a little bit earlier because we will have a staff development thing with our student assistants who work there, so just FYI on that. And then just kind of reinforcing some other messages that were shared about elections. Now the commission is transitioning into elections, or to voting process, so please make sure that you share that information, including information regarding write-in process if students have questions about that. All that information is located on the elections website if you have questions about it. And then again, finally, as we go into spring break, please get some rest, do some things that make you happy. Finish your midterms and pass all of those and do good luck on that. But please make sure that you utilize the break for you to do, again, something happy, whatever makes you happy that time. And then be prepared as we begin the student fees process and the legislative review that following week. So I'm not going to reemphasize that other than what's already been shared. Other than that, that's all that I have. Oh, no, I lied. The Shock Report Locker will be open over spring break, so if students need that service, it will still be open over spring break. And if you haven't been in front of the RSC outside of the Student Success Center, the community garden has officially moved, and it is planted and ready to go, and we're excited about it. I ordered a pair of overalls because I'm going to garden this summer. But I encourage you to stop by, take a look at it, and a big thanks to the First Gentleman, the Green Group, and the Locker staff for all of their work in making that transition happen. It's going to be great for us to bring fresh produce into their Shocker Support Locker once it starts growing food. So big thanks to all those involved in that project. Now that is all that I have, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any, Chairperson Bobbitt?
You had said that the locker is open during spring break. Is there any impact to business hours?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the hours will remain the same. I see Morgan shaking her head because she works there, so I'm going to go with it does not have any different hours.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, I don't know if you mentioned also to all of you that declared candidacy and are running for next session, make sure you submit your budgets for this Friday, just for consideration for that. I know, most of you will have a $0 budget, but that's okay. You do need to submit it to make sure you stay in the running. Okay, we will, oh, Senator Mallard?
If you're doing 0, do you still have to say 0?
Yes, you do, and you have to do it in Excel. So, like an Excel sheet? Yeah, I know. I read it and I was like, oh. But yes, if you're doing 0, you still have to submit it, so make sure you do that. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to Section 4, Public Forum and Presentations. Let me zoom in here, if I can. Okay. Public forum provides a chance for individuals to have the privilege of speaking before the Senate. This is a time for the association to listen to what the community has to say, and to that we offer undivided respect and attention. I would like to remind everyone that although we allow the speakers the privilege to use this platform, the opinions of the speakers do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the association or the university. First, we'll have Patrick Murphy.
Hi. That's a little loud. I'm not coming at you from the position of being a fine arts senator, more so as a fine arts student. A few weeks ago, the Sunflower published an article reviewing the school's production of Spring Awakening. It starts fairly normal. Quote, I appreciate that the director, Jacob McGlon, decided to bring the joys and tribulations of teenage angst to Wichita State student body. From there, though, it explores Solomon Puckett's performance in pretty unnecessary detail. Quote, there are multiple scenes where Gaber, Puckett's character, is sitting by a stream monologuing about his extremely pensive thoughts on society. I wasn't impressed with Puckett's unchanging face throughout these monologues. I didn't feel like it was acting. It simply felt that he was reading out loud, end quote. It's okay to have opinions on shows. The whole reason why the Sunflower exists is to let students' voices be heard, which I do think is a good thing. But it's important to remember that we are first and foremost students. As the writer had even mentioned, this was Solomon's first production at WSU. Myself and several others feel that it's pretty unfair to write so critically about him, about any student, especially since he's new. Constructive criticism on ways that it could have been better would have probably fit here, but this isn't really constructive. It's largely tearing down. Solomon actually posted a statement to his Instagram story saying, quote, this article truly did not affect me. At the end of the day, I'm confident enough in my performance and who I am as a performer to not let this kind of review get to me. But, quote, what you said and the way you talked towards anyone else could have been a lot more detrimental. The Sunflower, again, is a great way for students to amplify their voices, but writing this way about a fellow student is unnecessary and it really helps no one. The best thing that I could say is maybe just tone down a little bit next time.
Okay. Any questions? Chairperson Bobbitt?
No, you kind of gave a little bit of a recommendation there, but how would you prefer, or do you have any advice on what a more appropriate method of communicating displeasure with the performance would have been?
I personally do not. That would be a question that I would redirect to Solomon Puckett, the actor that was mentioned in the article.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Okay, undergraduate advocate Wassinger.
Hi, totally ignore the advocate in the undergraduate part. I guess keep the undergraduate. Ignore the advocate part. Just speaking to you as myself. I jumped up a little bit because I thought you were going to speak first, Hatch, because you're on the list, but it's okay. It's all right. So I'm mainly just speaking today as a student, primarily to commend the work done by Senator Azard, the Student Services Committee, as well as the DEI Committee. So for those of you who don't know me or who are just figuring out who I am, obviously I care very much about disability pride, as you can see. Yeah, okay. And I had the privilege to be a senator for 2 sessions. During that time, I would have been honored to be able to present legislation that you'll be seeing on the floor today. I was not smart enough or cool enough or had the foresight to do that. And it has been a long time coming on these pieces of legislation. I know that there are plenty of senators who've worked on this, not just like this direct piece, but have been gathering information about how we could fix these problems for a very long time. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm really proud of everyone who's done that. As somebody who couldn't have done that in this body, I really respect the tenacity that you've all had and your willingness to work across the aisle with the executive branch and just to really try to do something that benefits students. So I'm going to talk a little bit about SB 67-148. This is the ADHD, Autism, or Learning Disability Testing Support Creation Fund. Again, just speaking as a student, prior to my experience as the undergraduate advocate, I was a transition mentor. A lot of my personal identity does surround around my disability because it does affect my life. I do not have ADHD or autism or a learning disability, but I do have something called PMDD, which affects my daily life. I was diagnosed my freshman year, and I definitely would not be standing here before you or alive or above the ground if I hadn't figured that out. And a lot of that has to do with the support I was able to receive from CAPS. Unfortunately, CAPS is not able to diagnose students with autism or ADHD or learning disabilities. So the students who are directly going to be affected by this fund, they would not have had that opportunity that I had. But still, even though I don't identify as having these disabilities, I very much understand the comorbidity. A lot of people, can't remember the exact number, but it's like 60% of people with PMDD also have ADHD, so there's a very high comorbidity. And so I understand that this is affecting a lot of people. But as a transition mentor, I very much led with that knowledge that I was disabled because I thought that it was important that students know that we had accommodations at our university, and I wanted students to know right when they got on campus that there was somebody like them. And my number one question that I always got was, can the school test me for ADHD? My mom, my dad, they don't believe me. So-and-so, this, I haven't been able to receive diagnosis. I haven't had the access. I don't have the insurance. There's stigma around it. And so having to field those questions can be extremely difficult because for things like for PMDD, I could send a picture of my medication and receive an accommodation from the Office of Student Accommodations and Testing. But for ADHD, you do need a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is something that is a privilege to have and to be able to get. And I think that we need to recognize that it is very difficult to get one. And it's not something that we can just have our students get at Student Health. So I want to assure you guys that this is an issue and that if you do choose to pass this legislation, those funds will be utilized. I can guarantee that. I also just want to touch on how this affects disability pride on our campus. I've spoken a little bit about our flag, but the white section is for invisible disabilities, but also for undiagnosed disabilities. So disability pride does have room for people who are still trying to figure out what accommodations they need and what diagnosis they may fit under. It also accommodates anybody who maybe doesn't subscribe to a particular diagnosis. And so I think that moving in this direction where we can help students to secure diagnosis, to get accommodations is very integral. I also have heard a lot of information in my role as a student advocate just about students who we call it like ADHD bottoming out. So when a student does not receive accommodations or does receive accommodations but still struggles and ends up failing out of school when otherwise they wouldn't have if they had just received accommodations. And something that I've also really been experiencing this year in my role is students who self-identify as having a disability to their professors but don't receive accommodations and later try to bring it up in a grade appeal, but you have to be, first and foremost, you have to be your own advocate, and if you don't do that, it's not going to work in a grade appeal setting. So I think that this legislation will also help for all of those students who are in the process of getting an accommodation and can't use that necessarily as a reasoning for why they were mistreated in a course. Lastly, I just want to say on the topic of accommodations that from one human being who utilizes accommodations to another, there is no shame in receiving accommodations, and it is your legal right to have them. So I really encourage you, if you are in this room and you feel like you do have a disability, whether it be depression or anxiety or you're a wheelchair user or anything, you do have a right to accommodations. Then I'm briefly going to touch on AR 67-017, the Accommodations and Professor Accountability Act. Currently, there are no set expectations or procedure for when accommodations are not met beyond OSAT reaching out to that professor. So typically, as a student, you would have to not only say this is the accommodation I need, but then be on the task of always making sure that accommodation is met. And if it's not met, you need to be the one to reach out to your access coach. Then your access coach needs to be communicating with you to reach out to your professor, all while you're still supposed to be seeing this professor maybe twice, 3 times a week. And that can be very overwhelming. So I think that having this procedure in place, once again, these are all recommendations, nothing that you do tonight will be set in stone, but I think setting the conversation up that the student body does want to have a higher frame of accountability for accommodations is really necessary. Another issue is I personally have in the past ignored microaggressions or misuse of my accommodations and just opted to write about it in the review at the end, like on your semester review. I found out recently that it's by department whether or not you have to submit those comments to your tenure application review board. So the odds of you actually having a professor whose comments are read are dubious. We don't know. So I think that a lot of students operate under these assumptions. I can just put it on, rate my professor, I can just put it on the comments, but that's clearly not helping. So I just wanted to also talk about how both of these have been in the Accessibility Disability Pride Task Force, just to say that there have been lots of eyes on both of these pieces. The Accommodations and Professor Accountability Act was reviewed by 2 professors in our committee, as well as the Director of Accommodations. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Senator Miller?
What have you done for outreach when it comes to getting Faculty Senate to more or less express these concerns?
That's a really great question. So Faculty Senate is a little bit different of a beast. I don't typically hang out with Faculty Senate, but I'm trying very hard to reach them. And one thing I know we've talked a little bit about in this body about amending the Student Bill of Rights, that does have to be done through Faculty Senate. So I do know that they know of it. Neither of the professors that are on our task force are on Faculty Senate, but they did say that they thought it would receive good feedback. So I think those are conversations we'll have, but I think it'll be similar to the parking resolution today, that those conversations will happen as soon as you pass it. So I think Faculty Senate is probably going to take a more legitimate look at it once this body has passed that resolution.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak during public forum? There's one.
Hello, everyone. First time here. Good evening, everyone. I've just written this, so please forgive me. Good evening, everyone. What's up? How are you? And as the president of Muslim Student Association, I'm glad to stand before you today to invite you all to our Iftar Banquet 2025. This is one of our biggest annual events, and we are excited to open our doors to the entire Wichita State community. MSA is Muslim Student Association. Yes. And Iftar is a meal that breaks the daily fast during Ramadan, a month of reflection, gratitude, and community. But more than that, it's a time for unity. This banquet is not just for Muslim students, it's for everyone. It's an opportunity to come together, share a meal, and experience the spirit of Ramadan, regardless of background or faith. As a student organization, our mission is to foster inclusivity and understanding. This event is not just about food. It's about building bridges, engaging in meaningful conversations, and strengthening the diverse community we have here at Wichita State. So, I personally invite each of you and encourage you to spread the word. Join us for an evening of delicious food, cultural exchange, and deeper appreciation of one another. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'm open for questions.
Okay. Any questions? Senator, let's go Mallard and then Pizzini.
I'm not sure, can you say the time and location?
Yes, I'm so sorry, I missed that. It's in Begg's Ballroom on March 23rd, Sunday. It starts at 5 p.m. Yes. I will send out I have a few flyers here. I can distribute it to you guys. And yeah. So, any more questions?
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much. Okay. Anyone else who would like to speak in public forum? Okay. Seeing none. Now, Clerk Carter's computer is loading. Okay, it's better? Okay, that's fine. It's updating, it's a whole thing. Anyway, we'll move to section 5, approval of the consent agenda. So I have been asked to remove an item from the consent agenda for a formal vote. This is okay, normal, I can do that. So for the act on request to approve SB-67-171, I will bring that to a formal vote when we get to section 7. It'll be 7.1, and then condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, AR-67-019 will be 7.2, and from there. Okay, so when you look at the consent agenda, it'll be all of those items except for that one I just removed when we talk about approving the consent agenda as such. Do we understand? A polite nod would be appropriate. Beautiful. And I saw a thumbs up too. I like that. Okay. Any objections to approving the consent agenda as such? Beautiful. Seeing none, we'll move to section 6, consideration of pending business. 6.1. Act on request to approve SB-67-148, ADHD, Autism, or Learning Disability Testing Support Fund creation. Is the author here and would like to speak? You have the floor.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to undergraduate Advocate Wassinger for those very kind words at the beginning and further validating the need for this, as well as being proactive about ensuring accessibility across campus. I'm sure we've all seen something about this or other at some point, so I'll be trying to be a little brief about some of the changes that this has been through, because it's been through a lot. Just as a reminder, this fund is for students to be able to receive a diagnosis so that they'll receive proper accommodations to receive accommodations. So the first big change is that the name of the scholarship has changed from the ADHD Testing Support Fund to the ADHD, Autism, and Learning Disability Testing Support Fund. We're now able to do this because the psychology clinic is willing to partner with us to offer testing to those students, and they're willing to offer all 3 of these tests. Next is that the fund for fiscal year 2026 will stay at the $10,000. However, the allocated amount limit was raised from $500 to $800 due to the fact that the psychology clinic is offering a flat rate for this testing at $800. So with the scholarship at the discretion of the Hardship Fund Committee, they will either be offered the full amount of the $800 or the half the amount of the $400 of that. And the psychology clinic will also offer a payment plan to students, only having half the amount given to them. And they're willing to do 10 students per semester. And then the fund for clarifying again about the funding. The fund for fiscal year 2026 is first coming out of the Special Projects Capital Fund, and then transitioning into the Educational Opportunity Fund, fiscal year 2027. And then another thing that was added was specifying that students seeking testing for autism must have a referral from a healthcare provider or therapist in order to be considered for the test. This is at the request of Dr. Patrick at the psychology clinic, who's in charge of the autism testing specifically, just to ensure that they actually will need those services. However, it is not necessary for ADHD or learning disability testing. And then Act 3 was added to clarify that the whole thing basically can only happen if we get funds approved from the Special Projects Fund. And additionally, at the end, I will have an amendment to propose regarding the testing being done in the psychology clinic. And that is all. I will stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. So this is this bill's second read. It's been a while, long time coming. We've seen it tabled a couple times, but that's okay. We want to make sure it's as perfect as possible for when we go into the second read. So we will move into the debating period on this item. Is there anyone who'd like to speak during this time? Chairperson Bobbitt.
I would like to offer an amendment.
Dr. Gabriel Fonseca is already ready. Look at him go. You know what? That's actually kind of nice.
Now we see it.
Okay. What is your amendment?
I would move to strike the entirety of Act 2.
Do we have a second? I'm going to second because, you know, why not? Let's see. Go ahead.
So the reason I'm moving to strike the entirety of Act 2 is actually different qualms with each line. Starting with line 3 of Act 2, when considering the fiscal budget for 2026, the funding for the ADHD, Autism, or Learning Disability Test Support Fund must be set aside by the treasurer of the association with a minimum of $10,000 allocated. Due to the nature of the fiscal 2026 funding, this stipulation is out of line with how this scholarship would be funded. It would not be set aside. The treasurer would not be setting aside money. Money would be provided from the Special Projects Fund. So line 3 is not applicable in this situation. Under effective Act 2, Section 2, funding for 26 shall be provided from the Special Projects and Capital Fund and will be transitioned in the EOF starting in fiscal year 2027. I think this is redundant given Act 3 and the language stipulated within Act 1, Section 2. So essentially other parts of the bill already talk about this. Then for Section 1, I understand what the language is, or Act 2, 1, I understand what the language is intending to do. I don't believe the language actually reads with what is in line. My interpretation of this would be it's saying that the scholarship should become available and all the back end should be done by August 1st, but I do believe the current language lacks the specificity to actually clarify what's meant by all necessarily application materials for this fund must be prepared no later than August 1st.
I'm getting there. Just a reminder to the body as well, whenever you propose amendments, as it's the debate period, you can talk about what amendments you want to propose. Like, you can talk about it before and then propose it so that you are more likely to get a second because people will a little bit understand a little bit more, if that makes sense. You don't have to just immediately out of the gate propose the amendment. Not a knock on you there, but I'm just saying as we go forward, it might be a little bit more advantageous for you all if you want to propose an amendment to explain it a little bit more before we get into that process, because you might not get a second. Anyway, back to this. Any debate on this amendment? Senator Zard?
Just to clarify, I can make clarifying comments, right? And not just ask questions.
So this is a debating period on this amendment item, so you can discuss the amendment. If you have any clarifying questions or those kinds of things, please try to direct it to myself or Advisor Fonseca.
Okay. Just clarifying what I meant with line 1. basically, it's just saying everything needs to be in order with the scholarship by August 1st, 2025. So like the Google form or whatever, like the actual like means to submit the scholarship and stuff needs to be done. Like the funds need to be in order. Everything just kind of needs to be in place by August 1st, 2025. But if you can think of like a better way to say it, that just clarifying what I meant, but I appreciate it.
Chairperson Adriana Owens.
I guess my comment is mostly just ushering, hoping more discussion happens before we decide to vote on this, only because I'm just a little confused about like the decision to strike it instead of amending the language to just change it so that we can have these items but changed. And then I also I'm gonna phrase it as a statement, but it's kind of a question. I'm just confused by the thought process regarding saying that like section 2 or 3, specifically 3, aren't how it's going to work, and how that thought process came about, and if that's not how it works, how they assume it is gonna work, and because the interest of that, or why we included it, is we wanted to include must language to ensure that the scholarship would, in the future, have money allocated to it. Because there were a lot of worries in the committee that funds like this oftentimes go overlooked. And we're allocating this money from the Special Projects Fund now, this $10,000, but in the future, once all of us are gone and there's no one else who cares about this specific thing or like has a vested interest, we're worried that it might fall to the wayside the way that it did when it was first a scholarship with caps. Because this kind of testing scholarship, or this like, the idea, the bones of it existed in caps before we decided to turn it into something that we did in SGA. And the reason that that wasn't being funded is because nobody cared about it anymore. So I wonder if there's a way for us to include must language in a way that everyone can agree with.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
And Gabe can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it would be my assertion that you cannot include must language against an EOF item simply because EOF is at the discretion of the Finance Commission or Student Fees Commission. Essentially, they get to decide how much is funded in each of the EOF entities. I think to draw parallels between the language that's trying to model after versus what's actually put in. The stimulus money isn't it's not a line item within the student fees. It comes directly off the top, and that's why the must language is appropriate, because it's just saying before you're allowed to do any other allocation, you must take this money and put it aside for this purpose. Whereas EOF funded entities are discretionary. I do want to be clear, I'm not speaking for the commission. All of those specific line items are ultimately discretionary at the end of the day, where the committee can see the value of funding it, or the committee can ultimately decide that it is inappropriate to continue funding an EOF item.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to these because I think we have a little bit of a misunderstanding about line 3 specifically. In reading this is how I interpret how it's read. When creating the budget for fiscal year 26, so the budget, this upcoming budget, funding for this scholarship would come from the Special Projects and Capital Fund, set aside by the treasurer. In this case, I agree with the assertion that that's the incorrect person to assume would be setting aside that money, because they do not set the budget for that fiscal year. And from my understanding from that, after that, it's not legislated. It would be an EOF fund that's determined every single year through the student fees on how much it's funded. So to me, this language is fine, how it reads, because it's only talking about the establishment of the budget line itself. And this coming summer, when those items are allocated That $10,000 should have been allocated from the Special Projects and Capital Fund for that fund. So to me, I guess I agree with the sentiment that I don't think it's necessary to have line 3 because that's kind of baked into approving that budget line item, that it'll exist in that form for the fiscal year 26 because the Special Projects and Capital Fund will have funded that. It exists fiscal year 26. The second line, funding for fiscal year 26 shall be provided, that to me is fine. That to me makes sense, and that to me is perfectly fine. My misunderstanding there, and I guess my confusion there is, when it comes to EOF funds, it does not, to me, say that this has to be funded annually through student fees at a minimum of $10,000. To me, it's only saying that the Special Projects and Capital Fund initial deposit to this funding line item has to be at least $10,000. That's, to me, what this is saying. So to be clear, EOF funds and any student fees line item is at the discretion of the student fees, the Finance Commission, to fund those line items each year at student fees. Whether they want to fund $0, when they want to fund $10,000, $100,000, I don't know. It is up to the Finance Commission. To me, it doesn't have must language in the sense that it must be funded every single year. I don't see that language in here. But I do see that it has to be funded at a minimum of $10,000 for this upcoming fiscal cycle, fiscal year 26. So I hope, did that clear up anything to the body about anything? Okay, beautiful. I see some nods. That's wonderful. I'm going to go to Senator Hatch. Then we'll go Senator Mallard to Senator Miller, Chairperson Adriana Owens. Remind me of that whenever I forget.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the initial concerns correctly, I believe that a future amendment could be made if the body does not want to adopt this one that addresses these concerns by basically striking Act 2, Section 3, and in Act 2, Section 2, saying something along the lines of funding for fiscal year 26 shall be provided from the Special Projects and Capital Fund at a minimum of $10,000 and will be transitioned into the EOF fund starting in fiscal year 27. I think that that would cover most of the concerns expressed in this amendment, and I'd like to hear the body's thoughts.
Senator Mallard.
Exactly what Andrew Hatch said, but yeah.
Okay, then I said Senator Miller.
I'm not for sure if we're able to do this, but are we able to request the treasurer for comment on their role in this? Because I think it would be relevant to this since they are in the room right now.
If Treasurer Wong is comfortable answering questions, they can absolutely answer questions. But unless there are questions directed to them, I don't see a point. Senator Miller, did you have a specific question for Treasurer Wong?
What would be like the idea of their role in this? Like, it does mention the treasurer. I know there was like some conversations, but I'm not particularly understanding what the issue with like delegation. Would they know if that would actually fall under their purview?
To be clear, earlier, to be clear, when I said in line 3, if you see here, that the funds shall be set aside by the treasurer of the association, I was referencing that the budgets created are not created by the treasurer of the association in the same sense that you were thinking here. It's the president of the association. They create their budget, and this is what this verbiage is trying to garner. What I was stating is that it doesn't necessarily give what is attempting to be construed with this. But Gabe, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to mention something similar that, and I apologize that I didn't catch this when I saw the original draft, but yeah, the treasurer does not put the annual budget together. It is technically called the president's budget, and it's the president who does it. And even if the language stays, it would just be considered one of those friendly edits of it's the wrong person who makes that decision because it's not the treasurer's budget, it's the president's budget who sets it every year. So this would not be necessarily in the purview of the treasurer since they don't have the responsibility. They advise the president on setting the budget, but ultimately it's the president who decides what she or he or they want to send forward to the Senate for approval of their funds.
I have a follow-up question to Gabe before we continue because I think some of us are confused and that's okay, including myself. So when it comes to the allocation of the special projects and capital fund for specifically this line item, let's say the lovely President Howard comes forward with a funding bill to fund this. That funds would be baked into that line item budget for fiscal year 26. So I guess my question here is for 3, the way I'm looking at it, is this language necessary in the sense that like wouldn't that fund be set aside specifically for that? Or is it still possible for in that summer budget for the president to reallocate that funds as they see fit?
If I understand your question, and if I don't answer it, please let me know. Because we are talking about next year's money, not this year's money, I don't believe President Howard has the authority to spend FY26's money. I think the bill, if you are trying to, and this, I don't have a different way to say it, if you're trying to force the next student body president to allocate this money, the bill has to be written to do that. So theoretically, 3 is almost correct with the exception of, yes, taking the treasurer part off, but there wouldn't be a funding bill introduced this session because this is dealing with FY26's money. Because next year's student body president can take it to say, well, this session can't tell, President Howard can't tell the next student body president what to do unless there's a Senate bill that requires the funding to be earmarked, and then they would have to comply with statutes or decisions of the Senate, which the next president would be bound to, just like President Howard is bound by last session's bill around funding and whatnot. So if I'm understanding your question, and again, if I'm not, please tell me, if there was going to be funding provided for FY25 for this year, then yes, President Howard could introduce a funding bill to pay for a scholarship for this semester, but I don't know if she would have the authority to spend FY26's money, but the Senate has ultimate authority to do whatever it wants, and next year's president would be bound by whatever bills pass this session because bills continue year to year. Was that your question?
Well, yes. What I'm trying to get out for the body's information, too, is a couple things. One, I know a lot of us were under the assumption that a funding bill would have to happen this session. I wanted clarity as well, and thank you for that, for you all to know as we go forward with this legislation and potential legislation in the future regarding this. And also on this line item 3, I want you all to have that information as we go forward, that without this line item, this could not be funded at all. So it does have to be baked into this legislation. So consider that when you think about this amendment, and I would love more discussion on this item. I said Chairperson, Advisor Fonseca?
I think the other option that I would probably recommend as well is Act 1 is all amending the current bylaws. And so if there came to a moment where you, right, in Finance Commission last week, there were questions about what are legislated items of SJ's budget, and I reported back on how much of SJ's budget had a legislative item behind it. And so the other option of trying, depending on again, the direction you all go, you can legislate it in the amendment to the bylaws to say that it has to be funded at this dollar amount. And then the next administration and future administrations would have to continue to fund it at that, not necessarily earmarking where the money necessarily comes from. So there are some other areas that you can move that language into, just to kind of throw that thought out there as well. But thank you for the chance to say that.
Which also answers the earlier question asking whether or not an EOF fund could have a minimum, like legislated how much money at a minimum it could be funded at each student fee cycle as well. So just for clarity there to the body. I said Chairperson Adriana Owens and then Chairperson Bobbitt.
I was confused for a second, and now I've caught a second wind. So I think striking all of Act 2 Personally, I think the section 1 is fine. I think if we're gonna go the way Hatch or Josh mentioned, Senator Mallard or Senator Hatch mentioned, then I think it might be a good idea to do what Gabe said, once we go past this amendment and either vote or fail it. And whether or not we strike it, we can also add that language up in Act 1 again. I would also say if we end up striking it and then rewriting it through amendments, we would need to amend this Act 3 section to get rid of the implementation of Act 1 and Act 2 is contingent. We would probably need to get rid of that if we end up moving like Section 2 with the addition of what Senator Hatch said of the must be funded at this minimum $10,000 allotted up, and then we would probably need to get rid of Act. I don't know. I'm just saying that there needs to be more discussion, but so far I'm okay with striking the section if we then add it earlier.
Okay, and before I get to Chairperson Bobbitt, just for those listening and those of you who have not yet seen or know much about student fees, EOF stands for Educational Opportunity Fund. I know sometimes that's some jargon that's a little bit confusing, but necessary for you all to know as we go forward and talk about EOF funds or EOF line items and those kinds of things. And they're typically scholarships. So, I mean, they're all scholarships. So those are student fees line items in one of our sections, Educational Opportunity Fund, just so you know. Chairperson Bobbitt.
Okay, as much as I think Dr. Fonseca was trying to help, I think he muddied the water a lot because he introduced two completely separate funding policies. To address that, if it's coming out of the president's budget, it is no longer an EOF fund, it's off of the SGA line item, which means that it would be part of the broader SGA funding. That's where the president's budget would come in. So if you wanted to stipulate that the president had to set aside $10,000 within the president's budget, then that would come out of the SGA line item. It would no longer be an EOF. And then to the other aspect of that, if we're utilizing the Special Projects Fund, it is not within the discretion and power of the Senate to specify how much money we're pulling, because the Senate does not have control over that. So you can't tell the president they have to authorize a minimum of $10,000 because that's not within the Senate's purview. The president ultimately has discretion for how much they're willing to put forward and recommend to the Senate. And then to the point about fiscal year 25 versus fiscal year 26, what my understanding of what was recommended is we are not pulling out of the fiscal year 26 Special Projects Fund. We would be preemptively funding fiscal year 26 out of the Special Projects Fund from fiscal year 25. Excuse me. So the president would set aside $10,000 per se to be used in fiscal year 26. Because once again, the Senate does not have the authority to spend the funds of the next session. So we can't touch that money to say you must preemptively allocate funds out of next year's special projects. So that's kind of where my point is. These line items are incompatible with one another. You can't fund out of the president's budget if we are going to call this an EOF fund. And if it's an EOF fund, you can't put stipulations as to how it has to be funded. I don't know if that makes any sense, but these are completely separate processes with their own separate restrictions and rules. And I feel like we're muddying them together, but depending on the path we would like to take to fund this entity, it drastically changes the authority and the requirements that we would have to put in.
Anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Stinnett?
I more have a question for Dr. Fonseca. If we were to put something into the bylaws stating that we had to have a minimum budget, what would that look like?
It would have to be up in the Chapter 14 proposed line. And keep in mind, it'd be one of the only scholarships we have establish a number to. And I'm going to try and not muddy the waters, but to that point, right now SGA gets currently $34,500 from EOF to fund SGA scholarships that currently exist in our bylaws. It is up to the president to decide how much each of those scholarships get when, in this case, President Howard submitted her budget. She earmarked $10,000 for the hardship fund, $10,000 for the International Student Hardship Fund, $10,000 for the International Student Scholarship, and $4,500 for the Dreamer Scholarship. So she herself determined, based off of the money she gets from EOF, how much she's going to pay for each of those scholarships. If you were going to introduce language for establishing a new scholarship with a new minimum, you'd have to do it in Chapter 14, but then the issue you run into, which again you can do, but the issue you run into is then next year student body president would immediately have to fund that at the $10,000 and then figure out how to fund the other 4 scholarships with the remaining $24,500 that exists in that. Well, there's a proposal to reduce it, so the remaining $20,000 that exists there. So you would have to just legislate it within there. The issue that I, again, continue to encourage you all to think about is how are you going to pay for it on a more long-term basis, and why one scholarship would then trump the other ones that currently exist in the bylaws as well, and how you would have some established funding there. I think, so does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay. I need us all to get back in realignment. We are currently discussing the amendment to strike Act 2 completely. So I think it's important as we step into this conversation further is to decide what the point is. Are we trying to have this line item be within the SGA budget line item to be allocated by the next president each fiscal year? Or are we wanting it to, and from my assumption in reading this, especially Act 2, Line 2, is are we wanting it to be a separate line item in the EOF funds to be separate from those budget line items? Because I agree with Chairperson Bobbitt's sentiment there that it is contradictory. If it exists in the line item for EOF, then the president of the association has absolutely nothing to do with it. The Finance Commission does, especially for fiscal year 27, whew, many moons from now. Fiscal year 27, then the Finance Commission will get to decide how much money is allocated to it. If, in the event that you all decide to add must language, it will be the only line item in the EOF line item that has a minimum, which means you are telling the Finance Commission how they should spend their dollars. That's something you want to do, you can do it, but it's a broader discussion there that we have to have as well. Because this year, specifically, when we're looking at budget cuts and those kinds of things, the Finance Commission does have to look at those line items individually and decide how they want to spend their dollars. In next year, year after that, the Finance Commission will get to decide how they want to spend their dollars on those line items as well. In the event of budget cuts like we had this year, they wouldn't be able to pull $0, whatever. Or in the event that maybe the Finance Commission doesn't think this is serving students anymore, they wouldn't be able to take it to 0 or have that discretion there either. So that is up to your decision there to decide if you want to make sure it's funded, if you don't, if you want to have it be an outliner or not, or have that be a standard that's set, a precedent that's set, that's fine too. I don't care. But it's a broader discussion that we need to have there too, as well as you can bake it into the budget for fiscal year 26 like we were predicting. But I think I disagree a little bit on Advisor Fonseca's sentiment there that we can't have a funding allocation for that budget in the sense, I guess it's a question there, of if there's a funding bill for $10,000, let's say, ooh, where did we get that number? But a $10,000 funding bill that's passed, to set it aside to be like, this is separate to fund that line item for fiscal year 26. Is that possible? Because I know you stated we can't spend next year's money, but it is this session's money to be set aside for fiscal year 26.
No, that's a great question, and I think I just misinterpreted what line 2 said because it didn't specify funding from FY25 special project. I think it just leaves it blank to say the special projects and capital fund, and then it mentions 26. And yes, in fact, you cannot spend FY26's money, but if you're earmarking portions of FY25's money, then yes, you could do that. The secondary part, and this goes to the part that Senator Bobbitt mentioned, the Senate doesn't have the authority right now to say how much money from the Special Projects Fund. That has to come at the president's request, which I know has a line in Act 3 anyways, but so that was just a misinterpretation. I didn't know that this was coming from FY25 special project to fund FY26. So yes, I think it's maybe what your question was. So I'm going to say yes. I was incorrect based off of my interpretation of how it's written right now. Which I would say, and just real quick, if that is the case, I would then amend the language to specify FY25, because from an application process, how we would apply the language, it doesn't require this year's administration to fund it at 25 because it doesn't say 25. So I would, if that ultimately ends up remaining in the bill, I would then amend that language to specify that the funding is coming from FY25's request.
We'll go Senator Millard, then Chairperson Bobbitt.
I believe I have to just speak in negation of this amendment. I believe this Act 2 has good bones, but it doesn't have, it needs a little bit of a rework when it comes to the language. Due to, like, we already have the precedent of being able to, like, tell, like, the president of the next year that they need to spend this amount of money from, I believe the Special Projects Fund is, if I'm correct on what you said about that. We could just do that, and then it can be, we could modify the language to then just transition to a review on if we need to, if we can push this towards the UF fund, or we can keep it within the Special Projects Fund. That's just kind of up to there. It may not be enough. I do understand the sentiment that, yeah, we want to make sure this still exists, but there's a lot of questions with the language and how that can kind of cause some problems in trying to actually put this forward itself and legislate it.
I have thoughts, but let's go to a couple more people before then. Chairperson Bobbitt.
My ultimate recommendation for that would be instead of amending line 2 to say it's coming out of special projects for fiscal 25, I would amend Act 3, line 1 to say successful passage of funds from the fiscal 25 special projects budget. But then my secondary recommendation on that is if we want to set a specified amount to be paid for out of student fees, we should not be doing it out of EOF. We should be doing it the same way we did the stimulus fund, where it's just a fixed amount that comes off the top before Finance Commission, the budget's released to Finance Commission.
Senator Snett.
I'm going to go ahead and say as of the current amendment proposed, I'm not for it. I would love for us to go back into discussion and really talk about what's going on, but I feel like we're just going at like a circular moment, and we need to move out of this and get into better discussion about a new amendment that could be proposed.
I completely agree. With that, I'm going to end the debating period on this, and so we'll go into the voting on this amendment.
All right. All right. Good old turn it on and click double A, please. Okay, voting is open. Can I have y'all re-click? All right, with 4 yes, 14 no, and 3 abstentions, the motion fails.
That brings us back into consideration for these line items. Before I consider any potential amendments or thoughts, I need you all to really lock in to what you're wanting from this legislation, because I think we're confused, and that's okay. But I need you all to tighten up, because, and I'm seeing similar issues, it's not up there, but I'm seeing similar issues with Act 2 as well that I personally have in terms of, I think we need to change some things. I think that was a general, what we ended on in this conversation from the last amendment. That's beautiful, that's fine, let's do it. So the question really to you all is, do we want this to be a separate line item on the Educational Opportunity Fund? A separate line item, and I'm picturing the Educational Opportunity Fund, all the line items there whenever I say this. Do we want it to be separate? Do we want it to be baked into the SGA budget in the EOF fund that's like allocated from there, or it's the SGA office expenditures budget, right? Which would then allocate money towards that fund. I guess it's truly up to y'all's decision on that, of which would you rather have? Would you like it to be an EOF fund separate from that, or would you like it to be through SGA? In the event that it is through SGA, then SEB would be the primary guardians of that budget in that instance. If you would like it not to be SGA, then OSAT can be the guardians of that budget for that EOF line item. But it really is up to y'all. Additionally, if it is the case, then we need to just really have some amendments to these line items. I'm going to go to two very specific people on their thoughts, Senator Izzard and Chairperson Adriana Owens. Do either of you have thoughts on those? Because it is your legislation, and I would like to get your thoughts on how you would like this legislation to move going forward, so that you can clarify to the body the direction that we're going, so we can really get your thoughts. Senator Izzard?
As far as like guardianship from OSAT, not quite sure what you meant by that. It can't necessarily come from like OSAT, because they're not allowed to like give funds to students who don't like have accommodations or diagnosis or anything like that. I'm thinking, I mean, I would like for it to be like, to have like, to be like actually funded going forward. I mean, I think putting it under the guardianship of SGA, I mean, if that's a fairly simple thing to do, I think that would be the best thing as well, but yeah.
Chairperson Adriana Owens?
I'm going to yield to Andrew, and then you can circle back to me.
Nope, that's my discretion. If you have thoughts, give your thoughts now, because he is not guaranteed to be called on next.
Okay, fair enough. I would say when we originally thought of this in our perfect world, we thought that this was something that was going to be like similar to the hardship fund, where every year there's a certain amount that the president's budget and they're going to allocate to it. But we were like, okay, but we want to make sure it's funded every year at a minimum of $10,000. So we originally were like, where could we get it from? Then we found out the EOF fund is just a line item and holds like zero money. So we were like, okay, what do we do? And so we thought special projects and capitals fund, yippee. So ultimately, I don't care as long as it exists, it gets funded. Yeah, that's all.
Chairperson Bobbitt, do you have, no, before you speak, do you have an amendment you're proposing? I have a recommendation. Okay. Because if you have an amendment, then I'm going to move to Senator Miller. But if you don't, then Chairperson Bobbitt.
Okay, this one's going to be extremely controversial. I would recommend that we recommit this to Legislative Council. Let leadership figure out how to fund this and the process instead of fighting on the floor about it. We do still have considerable amount on the agenda tonight, and I don't foresee this being a quick conversation. I'm not going to make that motion. I'd love to hear thoughts on that, but that would be my recommendation.
Before we continue this, I have an amendment to make. Beautiful. But before I do so, I can speak, oh my gosh, like I said to you all to do so. I am not in favor of recommitting this simply because it has been proven that when it's recommitted, there are still issues had. And honestly, we just got to get it done. And if you all can't get together and get it done, then why are we here? And it's not too hard to me. I think we've gotten the general sentiment, we have the thoughts, we got Gabe's point of view, that's beautiful. Now let's get it done. To me, my thoughts after hearing Senator Azar's and Chairperson Adriana Owens is that we want it to exist within the SGA budget. Beautiful. There's already verbiage in there, you know, kind of allowing that to exist with Act 2, Line 3. When creating the budget for fiscal year 26, funding for yada, yada, yada must be set aside by the treasurer of the association with a minimum of $10,000 allocated. That's beautiful. We need to change it to president. So I'll have that be part of the amendment. Change it to president. With that amendment as well, I'm going to be adding Act 2 in Section 2. Funding for fiscal year 26 shall be provided from the fiscal year 25 Special Projects and Capital Fund. That adds that language there that it's not fiscal year 26 Special Projects and Capital Fund, because obviously we can't utilize other funds that aren't ours, and that's what Gabe said to do, so that's beautiful, we'll do it. This would add some clarity there. I don't want to touch Act 2, Section 1, because I don't really understand it in terms of what it's trying to, like the goal of that. To me, it's just, oh, we want to make sure this is ready for people to apply by August 1st. Beautiful. I do understand it. To me, this successfully allows for some of those changes to be made. And if other changes need to be made in the future, beautiful, that's fine. But this is my amendment for now. Do I have a second? Seeing multiple seconds. Chairperson Bobbitt, did you have something to say?
If you want it to exist in the SGA budget, you need to eliminate EOF from that line. And then we need to amend Act 1 to eliminate EOF language as well.
Okay, beautiful. In my amendment as well, I'm going to add for Act 2, Section 2, it'll read funding for fiscal year 26 shall be provided from the fiscal year 25 Special Projects and Capital Fund and will be transitioned into the SGA Office Expenditures Fund starting fiscal year 27. I hear I'm eating. I hear. And then Act 1, Section 2, Subsection 1, the ADHD, Autism, or Learning Disability Testing Support Fund shall receive its funding from the SGA Office Expenditure Fund. Anywhere else, team? I see what you're saying here. Hold it for a second, just while we get this amendment, then I'll get your question, okay? Do we say Educational Opportunity Fund or anywhere else? Beautiful, that's my amendment. Do I have a second? Seeing multiple seconds, beautiful. I'll move us into Senator Miller's question, and then we'll move to debating on this item.
When does fiscal year 25 actually end, and how much money do we have, like, right now, if it's going about to end?
So we're currently spending money from fiscal year 25. Fiscal year 26, so student fees, fiscal year 26 is what we're currently looking at right now. So it's fiscal years are a little bit different. They're always 1 year ahead in the sense that we're like approving funds. The last, is that summer that we end fiscal year 25? What, May?
25 ends on June 30th, and fiscal year 26 starts July 1st.
Did that answer your question?
It's more around, do we actually have that money right, like, to be spent then? Because
Are you asking from the Special Projects and Capital Fund?
Whatever you're grabbing it from.
Yeah, so just to be clear, and I hope you all watch the student fees, for fiscal year 26, the student fees budget did not take any money from the Special Projects and Capital Fund that we approve them to allocate. There is $500,000 that exists in this fund, and this is pre-approving that, like, with that budget. So what will be given to you all has none of that money being spent. So that money does exist. That's it. Senator Miller?
I think this is a friendly amendment. If you go down to Act 2, and then you go to it was about transitioning it. I believe if you could add it to also be reviewed after or during fiscal year 27 to be possibly transitioned to the EOF or transitioned to another area, in case that may not be the best place for it. I think that may solve the EOF problems.
I think there's some misunderstanding there. The EOF problem was solved once we put it into the SGA office expenditures line, because the SGA office expenditures line does not fit within that budget line items. Does that make a little bit more sense? Because we don't need to transition it to an EOF, because if it exists in SGA office expenditures, there's no point to transition it to EOF. But I appreciate your line of thought, but that no longer is a concern because we've decided to go that other route. Okay? Beautiful. Any discussion on this amendment? Senator Azard?
Point of inquiry. Found a little something in the rules and regulations. So it does say that all associations, scholarships, or hardship funds shall receive its funding from the Educational Opportunity Fund annually. Since this is like a support fund, is that going to be violating that in any capacity since we'd be getting it from SJ office expenditures, or no?
Advisor Fonseca.
No, because, and I think here's what's complicated about EOF and the way that SGA requests EOF funds. And this might go to Senator Miller's request. It's one, I would encourage you never to legislate 2 years in advance or 2 years in the future, because that's just way too difficult. I might forget, right? And unless any of you are here, I might fall down tomorrow and forget everything. Knock on wood, I don't. But I think the other, to your point, those funds that currently exist in the bylaws for EOF have all been approved as EOF funds. This is not an approved EOF fund. Next year, technically, SJ's budget goes up for review again for FY27, and the Joint Leadership Council next year can request to move this from the SJ office budget to the EOF fund, but that has to be done by the future student government, not this student government. So I would not say that that language there necessarily contradicts this one, mainly because you're legislating where this fund is coming from, because you can't pre-approve EOF funds. And next year, student government can say, thank you, 67, we're going to go ahead and move it to EOF through their process, through the budget process that they can do next year, which is more than likely what they probably should do next year to get it into the EOF fund. But one would not contradict the other, because all of those funds that currently exist are all currently approved EOF accounts that have passed the Student Fees Commission, have passed the Senate, and are earmarked as EOF funding. This one wouldn't necessarily fall in the same line, because you're earmarking specifically now where the funding will come from until it begins to apply into the next year.
Senator Hatch.
Okay, so you may have answered, this is a question for Gabe, and you may have answered this a little bit in what you said just now. What would transferring this to the SGA office expenditures look like for the other similar funds and scholarships that are funded by that? How impacted would they be by this being mandated coming out at $10,000? And what are those funds?
Are you talking about the other four in EOF, or are you talking about this one?
I think I can answer your question. So this line item, the language, doesn't technically make it necessary unless we make the must language of the minimum of $10,000. But what it would look like for next session's presidents beyond this year, because this year is establishing it, it's guaranteed that $10,000, as you know. What it would look like for 69, 60, 70 sessions, they would have to work with their budget that's approved through the student fees process, and they would have to fund that at $10,000 if there's that minimum language. And then if they don't have the funding to fund those other scholarships, they'd have to work within their budget to fund that at whatever amounts that they're able to. So there is no must language for the other scholarships within that fund, I believe. And Gabe can clarify if I'm incorrect. But it would really be allocating whatever is left over. That's up to the discretion of the president of the association at that time to do so. But it is another line item of thinking of when you create that must language, and in the event that there is not necessarily enough funding to fund all of those at their hope, that would have to be a tough decision that the president of the association at that time would have to make. Ultimately, it's up to various factors of how much would that be given in student fees past that $10,000 allocation from the Special Projects and Capital Fund this fiscal year, upcoming fiscal cycle. So in fiscal year 27, whenever that funding isn't necessarily guaranteed, most likely the sub office would ask for an increase in funding to say, hey, we have a new scholarship to fund that has a minimum of $10,000. Can we have this much funding? It would be up to not only student fees to decide if they want to fund that scholarship at that amount or how much money they'd be given, and then it'd be up to the president of the association to allocate that fund accordingly. So it is a tough decision when it comes to adding must language, because it's we want to make sure that this fund is required, but do we also want to do so in a way that's other funding or other scholarships aren't necessarily having that language? It's up to you all. Neither is good, neither is bad, but it will have to have potentially tough discussions in the future. Did that answer your question?
Kind of. I know that it's very amorphous because we don't know what the president's budget's going to look like in that year. I was kind of wondering what a similar budget next year would look like because those line items, right, I believe Gabe mentioned that they were all under a $45,000 umbrella under the president's budget.
34,500.
Okay. How heavily would those scholarships be impacted by losing that $10,000, I guess? How many, and what does that look like? Because that might be a sticking point.
So
just to be clear, the 10,000, this next fiscal cycle, the budget would not have to allocate $10,000 to this fund because it would be pre-allocated by the Special Projects and Capital Fund. So this upcoming, but also that's a fantastic question for future fiscal years where potentially they're also facing the same enrollment shortfalls and they would have to allocate funding from that. But I'll go to Advisor Fonseca.
No, you kind of said exactly what I was going to say. And I would maybe, to help kind of clear some things up, based off of how the current amendments are on the plate right now, this scholarship will be funded next year utilizing money that is earmarked for this year. In the future, next year student government will have to have a conversation for themselves to determine, we're going to keep funding this, but where are we going to put this permanently? They may change your whole thing this year and say, again, thank you 67, but 68 is going to put this into EOF, and we're going to formally request that the student fees committee do that. I would not worry about what future student government next year is going to do. Based off of how this bill is currently proposed, it is funded for next year if it passes, as long as the president introduces funding bill to get the money allocated, and then problem is addressed for this upcoming year. So future student governments will have to deal with this on themselves, because they can also go back, and I'm not saying they're going to do this, but they can also go back and cut the scholarship themselves and say, we're actually going to legislatively remove it as well. But this, at least, if it passes, funds it for 2026 and puts it into that perspective for at least the next fiscal year, utilizing, and correct me if I'm wrong, utilizing this year's Special Projects Fund. Correct? Okay.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
Okay, so we need to get some facts straight. Even within this amendment. So to Commissioner Hatch's question, it doesn't affect the other scholarships because the other scholarships are funded through the SGA scholarship line item 101999. Whereas what we're proposing to do is fund this one through the SGA office expenditure, or office expenditure fund, which is a completely different fund, has different sets of money. I don't know, that's maybe a Gabe question about whether it's legal, because it goes to the question earlier about it has to be funded through an EOF of like, which means technically, yes, we should be pulling it out of the SGA scholarship fund. But to Gabe's point, there's not enough money in that scholarship fund to fund this entity, which means the next session needs to hop to and get on that. Essentially, we need to clarify whether or not we're actually in regulations within our own bylaws. And to Gabe's point again, it doesn't matter, because we're covering this next fiscal year anyways, and the next session absolutely has to figure out how we're funding this in the future. And then just kind of a final thought, we're still contradictory between Act 2, Line 2 and Act 2, Line 3. Those both specify how we're funding for fiscal year 26, and they are completely separate processes. So we need to eliminate we need to eliminate 3 if we're intending to adopt the language of 2.
I'm seeing what you're saying. In terms of the office expenditures, yeah, I guess when I was thinking about it, I was thinking of the SGA scholarship fund, the EOF fund. I'm seeing, okay, clocking that. Thank you, thank you. I don't know how to visualize that for all of you, but in our big binders, we have the EOF funds, and then I know, I just got a groan from the audience. I know. There's the office expenditure fund line items, and then there's the scholarship funds as well. So the SGA scholarships fund, that's like the Dreamers scholarship and those kinds of things, and then the hardship funds. That's what I meant. But that would be an EOF fund. I guess I don't know the process of that. Please share.
So you are fine with the current amendment. I think just clarify whatever Senator Bobbitt is talking about relating to 2 and 3. This is saying right now, and honestly, you could scratch the second half of number 2. Right now, when this bill is, let's say, is passed and signed, the way that I will have to look at this and implement it with next year's student government is to say, you are required to fund a scholarship at $10,000. You're getting it from special projects that has already been approved for you. So we're subtracting special project money from 2025, and it's funded for 2026. 2027 will have to be talked about in a long-term process, because if the student fee bill passed, both of those funds have received budget cuts in there. So they will have to be adjusted at a later point. This is a very similar practice to what happened when the Dreamer Scholarship was created. It was created as an office budget first and then moved over to EOF. Same thing with the Domestic Hardship Fund. It was created as an office budget first and then moved over to EOF. Most student governments have moved scholarships back into the scholarship for the future. Unfortunately, the Senate does not have the authority to earmark EOF money, because it has to follow the student fees process. But every single scholarship that has ever been paid for out of EOF has originally started, as long as I have been here, originally started as an office fund, as an office expense. And when we talk about the office expense, I'm talking about the $800,000 that student government has to run student government. And that has eventually moved over to EOF with the approval of Joint Leadership and the Fees Commission in the following year. Future part of this scholarship, it is guaranteed for 1 year. The future, student government will have to deal with it next year, which is their job to deal with, just like every one of your predecessors have ever done when they've created new scholarships.
So I did the right thing. Beautiful. You had me questioned for a second. Clarifying question to Bobbitt. Contradictory point there. What are you referencing? I don't quite get it.
So under the current language, we are funding the scholarship twice. Line 2 says we're setting aside $10,000 from fiscal year 25 to fund the scholarship. Line 3 requires that the president set aside an additional $10,000 out of next fiscal year's budget to allocate to this scholarship. So essentially, instead of pulling the $10,000 from the special projects, we'd be pulling $20,000 total, because the language is contradictory. Right now, it requires us to do both.
Yeah. Do I have a proposed friendly amendment to that? I'll go Chairperson Adriana Owens.
Friendly amendment. We strike line 3, and then we add to line 2, starting fiscal year 27 at a minimum of $10,000 allocated. Yeah? Hmm?
Gabe, can you write that so I can? Adriana, say it again. Sorry, Chairperson Adriana Owens.
Strike line 3, and then add to line 2 at the end, starting fiscal year 27 at a minimum of $10,000 allocated.
I'm gonna ask that you put funding for fiscal year 26 shall be provided from the fiscal year 25. I'm trying not to like turn so much because I know that it then won't pick up whatever I'm saying. At the fiscal year 25 special projects and capital fund at a minimum of $10,000 and will be transitioned into the yada, 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 yada.
Can I maybe offer a cleaner way?
Of course you can.
I would probably just strike number 3 and end number 2 of shall be provided from the FY 2025 Special Project Capital Fund, period. Because the funding bill that will be introduced will fund it at $10,000. So I would just strike and end it from there and not even talk about 2027 at all. Because you are creating a scholarship by Act 1. The scholarship will have to be funded in some capacity in Act 1. So I would probably, just to kind of clear this up and so that we can move on to the other pieces of legislation, I would strike 3 and period at capital fund and be done and let the president introduce the funding bill. If you don't like the number, you can amend it, pass that budget, and that becomes the funding for 2026, and let next year's student government deal with the permanent funding from there.
Oh my gosh, exactly what I was gonna say.
Point of inquiry.
Senator Hatch.
Are we allowed to amend funding budgets from the Special Projects and Capital Fund since we do not have jurisdiction?
Yeah, we can, and we have.
Point of information.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
This one's to Gabe. To that question, if the budget is proposed, the Senate amends it, the president vetoes, does the Senate have the right to override the veto because so essentially it's if the president disagrees with the amended budget, it's out of the president's control at that point?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is the amendment on the floor with it took a couple routes, and that's okay.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Chairperson
For a
Bobbitt.
friendly amendment, you need your second to agree to it.
I was getting to that. Thank you. As I was saying, this is the new proposed amendment on the floor. Thank you, Chairperson Bobbitt. In a roundabout way, you got to where I was going to in a while. Do I have a second? Seeing multiple. I'm going to allow 2 more speakers on this amendment at a max. Anyone who'd like to speak on this? Beautiful, none. We'll move into voting.
Voting is open. With 20 yes, 0 no's, and 1 abstention, the motion passes.
Snap and then move on. You know how amendments do. Okay, now this brings us into debate on this item. I do know that there were potential other amendments that needed to be made, so this would be the time to do so, and swiftly. I'm going to go Senator Azard and then Senator Hatch. And then
I'm going to propose an amendment saying all recipients of this scholarship must have their diagnostic testing completed at the Wichita State University Psychology Clinic. And any suggestions on where we would need, would that go under scholarship distribution or, I'm sorry, I can't, wait. Eligibility. Where should we put that?
Eligibility would be fine.
Okay.
Dr. Fonseca?
Can you email me that? 'Cause that was a long one. Thank you.
And just a reminder to the body, we're looking real close to 9:30, so just keep that in mind because an extension of the meeting is on the horizon. Okay, with that, is there a second to this amendment? Seeing a second, thank you, Senator Stinnett. Would you like to speak on this amendment, Senator Zard? Would you like to speak on this amendment?
In talking to Gabe, he had suggested that we put something in there saying that we should like specify that the testing is going to happen within like the university instead of like outside, like it being external.
Chairperson Bobbitt?
With that, I would probably make a recommendation that you specify how payment is to occur. Is it going to be directly to the clinic and they will just invoice SGA? Or are we going to hand the student $800 and be all like Godspeed? Or what's the process on that?
So to be clear, that is outlined in Section 2, Administration and Funding. The way that the Hardship Fund Committee works is when an applicant, applies for the Hardship Fund, that funding goes to the Student Account Suite. They are able to utilize that fund to pay directly to the psychology testing stuff. So that is already outlined with this. Chairperson Bobbitt, did you have a follow-up?
My question is, should it be that way?
That's a question for another broader discussion. Let's keep it germane to this amendment, and then that might be a discussion later. Any other discussion on this amendment specifically? Senator Island?
A primary point of clarification, or kind of a question to Senator Izzard, does the psychology clinic currently have the ability to diagnose both ADHD, autism, and the other vague learning disabilities that are outlined in the general?
Yes, they do.
Thank you for that question. Senator Izzard, or Senator Island?
I had a secondary question. This might perhaps be to Advisor Fonseca. Because the bill is no longer putting the scholarship through like the EOF fund or a hardship fund, would it still be able to have the same types of scholarship distribution that are outlined in Section 3? Or because it's like it's coming from like the SGA expenditures, would that payout happen in a different means?
It would not. So regardless of where the money comes from, it still would be able to go. And I think the question here goes back to how are we dispersing the dollars? Is it going to the student or is it going directly to the clinic? Regardless, if it were to follow the rest of the process we do with scholarships, it would be paid out through the office fund through the scholarship account, which would be fine as well. So there'd be no difference in how it's paid out unless you specify that you want it paid out a specific way.
Any other debate on this particular amendment? Senator Murphy.
So I don't know how to ask this. So in section 4, line 2, where it says applicants seeking testing for autism must provide documentation in the form of a referral, how does that compare with 3, where it says all recipients of the scholarship must complete their diagnostic testing at the Wichita State? Because I'm going to be fully honest, I'm not 100% well-versed in the world of psychology and the differences. So it's like, would you have to first provide the documentation and then do a diagnostic testing here so they can confirm it?
I can answer that, but I'll let Senator Zard. Oh, okay, whoever.
You're good. Just clarifying. Yeah, so referral and diagnostic testing is kind of 2 different things. In most situations, some places do actually require a referral from some sort of healthcare professional. it's not like a formal diagnosis. It's just saying, hey, this person, like, I can verify that they have a suspected maybe ADHD or autism or something to that effect. And then they'll then take that like document to where they're getting tested. And then that'll be like okay, we can actually go ahead with this testing because there's now like verification knowing that like they need these services, I guess, if that makes sense. You're good.
Senator Murphy.
So, as someone who has been diagnosed on the spectrum for, I don't know how many years at this point, so I have like an official diagnosis from like a psychiatrist. Would I have to then do it again through the psychology clinic? Again, I'm just asking for clarification because I don't know.
I got that one. Okay, so to be clear, this scholarship primarily is for people who do not have access to testing at, well, any dollar amount, really, because as you probably know, I know too, and many people I know, it's expensive. Without insurance, it's like $2,000 around there. So this is for people who are not diagnosed and can't traditionally afford to get diagnosed. So they'd receive the referral, and then the line item in question is specifying that it has to be at the psychology clinic is only also because this is in partnership with the psychology clinic. This is why we're able to utilize these services at such a discounted rate at $800. So it's saying if you receive this scholarship in this sense, you have to then go to our partners who will then be able to diagnose you at this $800 amount. Because otherwise they could receive the award and go to a different testing clinic and get their diagnosis there, but that's not the point of this scholarship. The point is to maintain that partnership. I mean, there's contracts being drawn up that are being signed to ensure that that partnership exists, and that is at that $800 amount. Beautiful. Any other thoughts on this particular amendment? Chairperson Adriana Owens.
I also want to mention that the indication of the referral being needed is for the application process to get the scholarship money, not where you have to get tested. I'll also say you don't have to get that referral specifically at the psychology clinic. You can get it at CAPS. You can get it by your primary care provider. You can get it by anyone. A referral is just you might have this, not like a formal diagnosis. This amendment, good idea, just means that the people who then get this fund have to go specifically to the psychology clinic for this diagnosis. So kind of, this is like 2 is at the beginning of the process and 3 is at the mid to end process.
Thank you. I'm going to close the debating period on this item and move into the vote on this particular amendment.
Voting is open. With 22 in favor, the motion passes unanimously.
Snaps, move on. Okay, Vice President Fawn.
I move to extend the meeting till 10 p.m.
Beautiful. Do we have a second? Oh, seeing multiple seconds, that's beautiful. This is not a debatable motion, so I'll move directly on voting on this item to extend the meeting till 10.
Voting is now open. With 17 in favor, 2 against, and 3 abstentions, the motion passes.
We don't need to snap about that. We're moving directly into the debating period on this item. Senator Hatch and then Chairperson Bobbitt.
So I know I asked, a similar question was asked earlier, but I think this is really important and I don't want to be in violation of our bylaws. So even though it says it's going through Section 2, Item 2 says it's going through a hardship fund committee, it is not in violation of our bylaws of creating a hardship fund.
The hardship fund already exists. So I guess.
I understand that. There's language in our bylaws, Chapter 2, Section 2, Association hardship funds. The Association Hardship Fund board, basically it says like there are rules about creating a hardship fund. And since it goes through the hardship fund committee, I just want to make sure that we're not doing anything against our bylaws.
Advisor Fonseca?
To my understanding of how the bill is written, I think it's just designating this group as the decision makers, not establishing another hardship fund. I think in lieu of creating another committee, this is just delegating the responsibility of administration of the scholarship to the hardship committee. But I think that has to be a clarification for the authors of, you're just intending for that already board that already established to be the group that here to make that decision. And I'm seeing head nods, so I'm assuming that's a yes.
Does that answer your question? Beautiful. Chairperson Bobbitt?
Okay, I would like to propose an amendment to Section 2 to include language saying that no more than 5 scholarships may be awarded per semester. I do believe they said that they could handle 10 throughout an academic year, or I'm sorry, I haven't been called on to explain myself.
Just go ahead.
I do believe the psychology clinic said that they could handle no more than 10 tests a year, 5 per semester. So this just says that we cannot award more than 5 per semester.
Is there a second? Seeing no seconds, we move back into the debating period on this item. Senator Zard?
I just want to clarify about that. They said 10 per semester, excluding the summer semester. So it could just be no more than 20 per year.
Additionally, I hesitate to put additional language prohibiting that in the event that in the future they are able to handle more cases. Also, I feel like we're talking in a circle so much, and that's fine. But at this point, we're picking apart the legislation in ways that I don't think is necessary. You can still propose your amendment, but just a personal thought. Chairperson Bobbitt, did you have something?
I would do a friendly amendment to 10 scholarships per semester.
Your amendment did not have a second, so you have to propose a new amendment. Chairperson Bobbitt? I did call for a second. There was no second. Chairperson Bobbitt, I'm giving you the floor to do so.
Okay, then I would further call for an amendment that no more than 10 scholarships may be awarded per semester.
Is there a second? Seeing a second. Oh boy. This moves us into the debate on this item. I'm going to let 2 people speak in favor, 2 people speak against. That's it. Chairperson Bobbitt?
Well, I do respect the desire to not limit it should the testing capacity increase. I do believe we should be respectful of their stated limits on this. And once again, when that contract is renegotiated, if it is renegotiated, then that it would be appropriate for the Senate to change that. But at this time, I do think we should put reasonable limits on the amount of scholarships. That way we are being respectful and falling in line with their requests.
Anyone against that would like to speak? Chairperson Adriana Owen.
The reason I'm against this, because I like the sentiment of capping the number to make sure that each are allocated each semester in a certain number. The problem is that we're not just awarding at $800. $800 is the maximum. We also have $400 options for students, so that if we decide to give students $400 and then they do a payment plan, that could mean we have more than 10 students a semester getting allocated this fund. So I feel as if this doesn't really answer the issue. It kind of creates problems for the hardship fund to navigate the $800 versus the $400. Yeah.
Any in favor of this amendment who would like to speak? Anyone in favor who hasn't spoken yet? Chairperson Bobbitt.
Okay, so to address the chairperson's concerns, it has nothing to do with the denomination of the scholarship. The psychology clinic has said that they cannot do more than 10 tests. or diagnostics per semester. So this is just saying that no more than 10 people would be awarded this scholarship.
Okay. Anyone against? I'll allow one more person. Ooh, Senator Miller.
I am mentally decayed at this point, but I want to just say, no, this shouldn't be an amendment. Simply put, this scholarship, as it is, the psychology clinic can at any time just say, hey, we're not taking any more people. So while we want to care about respect, about the pay respects and to the psychology clinic themselves, it should not be a focus in this legislation to cap it, because we are now going way off into the bush. We are going way off into random places. And just like the speaker has mentioned, we do not need to legislate this part of this bill. It is unnecessary, and this is just shouldn't be considered as an amendment.
Okay, that brings us into the vote on this item, on amending to add this.
Voting is now open. Who? All right, with 6 in favor, 10 against, and 4 abstentions, the motion fails.
Okay, that brings us back into debate on this item. Anyone who hasn't, Senator Pizzini.
Hi, I just want to make a comment. The legislation, and we were in the Student Services Committee for most of the debate back and forth for this legislation. It wasn't taken lightly. It was proposed because it's needed for our students. There's a need for it. I don't have any more objection. I think the edits that we made tonight are sufficient. And I believe that if we're allocating the money from this session and it's guaranteed funded for next session, I think at this point, given everything that Advisor Dr. Fonseca has said, I think we should leave it at that, because what we've done and the work that all the senators involved have done with the legislation so far up until this point has been a lot, involving other departments. They have really thought about this legislation, and it was not taken lightly. And again, it's going to be in the hands of the next session. I'm happy with it being funded and for students to at least enjoy the scholarship and have an opportunity to get the scholarship next year. Hopefully people will get the word out that it's available and people will actually utilize it. And I think that, I don't think we have any other amendments to make tonight. I think we should really vote, or at least have some kind of vote to pass this legislation. And I don't know what the sentiment is for the rest of the senators, but that's my view on it.
Thank you. Chairperson Bobbitt.
Okay, I had a question for the authors. Under Section 2, Line 3, could you explain why it was deemed appropriate to ask questions regarding future plans and how it will support their goals?
I'll allow it. Senator Zard.
Yeah, that was basically, so when I did talk to Isabel Medina Kaiser at OSAT, she kind of wanted it to kind of be, she brought up a good point of it kind of being a scholarship-y fund to make sure that it's going to people that are actually going to use it so that it's actually like helping them out in the future. So say they're like, oh, I want to go for higher education, and it's not excluding people that don't want to go for higher education, but people that are like, I want to do this and I also want to like get a job or something to that effect. Like, it's more just kind of like not filtering out people, but kind of getting better understanding about the applicants so that we can better, like, you know, allot it.
Chairperson Haynes, did you have something?
Good evening, everybody. Loved all the lovely circular debate we've been having all evening long. With that being said, was it? I moved to call the previous question. Yeah, that's it.
That would be in order at this time. Remind me, is this a debatable motion?
It required the second, it's debatable.
Well, I know. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a two-thirds
It's
vote,
not
too.
debatable?
Oh, sorry, not debatable, but
I
it is
was
two-thirds.
looking at him when I
Yeah.
asked. I hope you know that.
But it is a two-thirds vote because you're ending
Oh,
debate.
no. Because earlier, we have history about that. Okay, is there a second for this motion? Seeing multiple seconds. This is not a debatable motion, thank you. And that moves us directly into the vote on this item. This would allow us to vote on this legislation as it is with all the amendments that have been passed.
Okay, before we vote, I will say with people leaving, our present amount is 21, meaning our simple majority is 12, two-thirds majority is 14. And just a reminder that if you leave, you are marked absent for the whole meeting. So, okay, voting is now open. With 20 in favor and 1 no, the motion passes.
What a victory. This moves us to 6.2, act on request to approve. Sorry,
No, you now have to vote on the actual bill.
Oh, yes. I do. Hey, scratch that. Hey, scratch that. Just kidding. Yeah. Let's vote on the actual bill.
Voting is now open. With 20 in favor, 0 against, and 1 abstention, the motion passes.
See, when people clapped for us voting in favor of moving to previous question, do you see where I got a little confused there? I was like, oh, we're done. We're not done. Okay, now we're done. Okay, congratulations. That's beautiful. This is amazing. Moving to 6.2. Act on request to approve AR-67-015, Stop the Spread Act. Is the author here and would like to speak? You have the floor. Beautiful.
Hello, everybody. I am mentally decaying, so I want to make this quick. Me and the Student Service Committee worked really hard on trying to cover a lot of the questions that went over in the first read, and we shifted a lot of the language to be more representative of what we have, the information we have, while still meeting the same goal that we set out to accomplish. And that is, with all that being said, the only amendment I hope to hear from this bill is changing the language, which I'm planning on actually saying for, which is shifting language from like the start of the fall semester, which is, I believe, whereas on line 5 to the academic year, because recently there has been also an uptick in viruses spreading on campus, and also the start of the fall semester, it was bad. It was also bad later on in the fall semester, and also currently in the far past the start of the spring semester. So that is the only amendment I am hoping to propose, and that's going to be the one I propose. Is there any questions?
Before we ask any questions, I just want to clarify our last bill as well. We had a lot of questions to ask after the fact. I appreciate that. Getting more information, that's beautiful, ask the questions. Make sure you're asking them now. Okay, any questions? Senator Murphy.
I remember in the original, during the first read, that the language largely was just on campus, on campus. Has there been any changes? I couldn't tell. Has there been any changes that would be impacting other like satellite locations or satellite campuses like WSU South or any other ones?
I don't believe that's within our purview. I believe this is only campus related, and I think it's like, I don't believe it's within our purview. That's why I never focused on it, because also I have no idea about the people on WSU Tech and the satellite campuses. A lot of them are, if they do go to WSU and they go from here to the satellite campuses, this would be covered in the bill because it goes over the places where students frequent, which if they come from the campus, WSU campus, to a satellite campus, like for biomedical research or sound design or something like that, it would still believe if it was under our purview as an organization to be covered there.
Any other questions? Senator Pang?
So I was just wondering if you got any of the other colleges. I'm losing my head right now. I was wondering if you talked to any of the other colleges about this and what they thought about it.
I did talk to a few different colleges. However, I cannot use that information according to my discussion with Gabriel Fonseca because it's not considered like a qualifying information. If I were able to speak candidly, I would, but because there's no apparent like surveys need to be done, there's like some regulations with that. Unless he and the speaker are willing to possibly approve that and it doesn't violate any of our bylaws, I can go in to discuss some of those.
Senator Mallard?
You mentioned the university policy is not consistent. There's no like clear CDC guidelines within the policies. Where did you look for this? Because if you go to the website, there is a coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 policy that was updated March or October 1st of 2024 that does state CDC guidelines, what to do if you're sick, how to help other people, and it has a lot of links there. So I just want to know where you got that we don't have a policy.
If you read the bill, it goes into trying to make it more accessible, more or less, to students. And that's why I had the policy and procedures recommendation, because we cannot order the university to do anything really. What we can do is up to what powers we have. But when it comes to I proposed in the discussions with the Student Service Committee to have a Chapter 22 to these policies and procedures. And this is going to go over all of that. It makes it pure, straight, and right in front of you. It's not going to be hidden by a Google search. It's not going to, because people are not going to know, this is the truth. They don't know what to properly search to get those proper results, then they're not going to know that policy. So it is very important that we have it clear and center on the wichita.edu website and the policies and procedures place for under a new chapter that goes into depth, because
I'd also like to clarify that specifically what we were looking at is the spread of airborne illnesses, not just in the context of COVID. So we wanted to make sure that by creating a Chapter 22, we address all health-related concerns, because we found that they did reference it pretty accessibly, COVID-wise, like on websites, but then you would look at other health-related stuff, and it would be on a separate website altogether, and another one would be a separate website. Is it easily accessible? Yes, if you search. But we wanted to make sure that by creating a Chapter 22, we can just get all of that information into one section, just easily accessible under one chapter. So yes, that information is out there. It's not under the same section. So we want to make sure we do that, if that makes sense.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Can I get a little raise of hands about how we like a little 5-minute recess to use the restroom and things like that, or if we don't want that? Okay, I'm just saying 1, 2. Okay, we'll keep going, keep trucking, but I just want you to know at any point if you're like, hey, we need a little bit of time to just like lay on the floor for like 5 minutes, I understand. Okay, or also just leave at any point and then come back. I just forgot that you all can do that. We can't really do that. Okay, this is this bill's second read, so we'll move directly into debate on this item. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in favor of this item? Senator Miller?
This has been long in the works since last October, and we have gone through a lot of different phases of actually making this legislation. This is my first piece of legislation, and I think it's very important to like kind of look at it and how it's, if I was able to share with you how its development over the entire session, it could go on and on. But I think it has gotten to a point where it is in a great place to be passed and be as a recommendation to the university to help not only help students, but help people who are coming to campus to visit or are, working here. It's not just a student thing. It can be seen as much more.
Anyone who'd like to speak against this legislation? Senator Mallard?
I'd actually like to speak in abstention, if I may.
Of course, go ahead.
So both sides. There are a lot of things I do like about this. I do think like installing the signs in bathrooms. If you actually go to, forgetting, I think it was Jabara, because like I had mentioned that they're the ones with the no smoking signs. They're also the only building that does have hand washing signs. A few other things. It's late. My thing about the policy is we do have a policy, and it does state COVID-19, RSV, influenza, and other respiratory viruses that we could make a line item. But again, if we're having to make a line item, then they're also having to search the line item. So at that point, they're now having to search for our rules and policies instead of just looking up respiratory or COVID-19 rules. In general, I'm for some of this, against a few of this. I've also spoken to an old faculty senate from health professions, and they did state that they would have liked to see a health professions senator sponsoring this bill, as it might not get as much push within faculty senate due to the fact that it doesn't have that on there. I'm just saying that for future reference. If we do stuff like this, make sure you do speak to the actual senators that would be writing that.
Anyone who'd like to speak in favor of this legislation? Anyone who'd like to speak against? Anyone else who would like to speak? Senator Murphy.
Okay, so going back to my original question, I don't think I fully got it. So just for clarification, so this is entirely just for main campus, not any other secondary locations. Am I correct? I don't know who I'm asking that to. I guess to
Senator Miller, give me a yes or no.
It's more of it depends on what the university, how they take this and more or less implement it at that point. It doesn't have a yes or no to this, so.
Vice President Font.
I move to extend the meeting to 10:30.
Seeing a second, thank you. This is not a debatable, yes, is it? No, you're right, thank you. It's late, I'm also decaying, as Senator Miller put. This is not debatable, so we'll move directly into vote on this item.
Voting is open. With 16 in favor, 3 against, and 0 abstentions, the motion passes.
Okay. I'm not sure if that answered your question, because I barely remember.
about the same as last time.
Okay, so I guess I have my own question then. It was stated, Advisor Fonseca, please, yes, please.
Sorry, just to clarify, Wichita State means main campus and all satellite campuses, with the exception of WSU Tech because that's not Wichita State. So yes, Wichita State means this and all satellite campuses.
Beautiful. I was literally going to say I'm confused because I assumed the exact same thing. Beautiful. Now that we're clear on that, anyone else who would like to speak on this item before we move to the voting? Seeing none. Senator Miller?
I need to do my amendment. If I'm correct, I can do my amendment now.
Yes, you can do your amendment now. What is your amendment?
The amendment is on line 5, and line 4, line 5, to change the start of the fall semester to the academic year. Because as I said, this was an amendment that I wanted to push forward because I have seen it, I've heard it from fellow students, I've heard it from faculty. Like one of my classes were actually canceled today because of the professor is out sick. Because of what's spreading on campus, and this is a recent thing, and this is still going on. So, in all seriousness, I believe it's very important to just change it to this academic year.
Is there a second for this amendment? Seeing, okay. Is there a second? Chairperson Haynes, thank you. This moves us to debate on this item. Anyone else who would like to speak on this? I'll go Senator Stinnett and then Chairperson Adriana Owens.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the fall semester is the start of the academic year, so I feel like we're just changing it and it's going to be redundant.
That's not, it's supposed to be the,
You have not been called on.
Point of order.
Chairperson Bobbitt?
The senator is indicating that the amendment was incorrectly recorded.
Regardless, if I have not called on you, you do not speak. Is that clear? Beautiful. Senator Stinnett, you were speaking?
Oh yes, I was just saying that I feel like the start of the fall semester and the start of the academic year are the same thing, so I don't really see why we need the amendment.
Senator Miller.
as it was stated, this is incorrectly inputted. It should be removing, cross out the start of the fall semester fully and just put campus with, or I guess it should be spreading on campus in the current academic year to maintain relevance.
Okay. I'm gonna need a new second for this because I think it's changed the verbiage enough for me to warrant a new second for this. Is there a second for changing it to this item? Seeing a second by Senator Lewis. Chairperson Adriana Owens.
I want to propose a friendly amendment to have it be on campus starting fall and then 2025. Right?
Chairperson Adriana Owens. What exactly are you trying to do? Just say it one more time.
I guess I thought a year would be more pertinent than just say academic year. Whatever.
Do I have a second for this? Senator Miller, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, I mean, it maintains the timing
Please
relevance.
just continue with a yes or no. And then Senator Lewis, are you, as the second, are you comfortable with this change?
No, this is just returning it to exactly where we started. So, if we're going to amend it, we should amend it to be saying that it should start right now, as soon as it passes. If we're not, otherwise, we should not amend this.
Advisor Fonseca?
Can I ask Senator Miller a question of clarification? Senator Miller, would you be okay if we just put period on campus and scratch the rest?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That works.
So let's potentially would just read this.
Yes, could I change my amendment to has been spreading on campus?
Is there a second? Seeing multiple seconds, beautiful. Any other discussion on this item? I allow 2 more people to speak. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move to voting.
Voting is now open. With 17 in favor, 1 against, and 2 abstentions, the motion passes.
We snap and then we move on. Okay. Any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, beautiful. We'll move into the debate, or sorry, no, we'll move into the vote, the final vote on this piece of legislation.
Voting is now open. With 10 in favor, 5 against, and 5 abstentions, the motion fails.
I heard the resounding, huh? So.
With 10 in favor, 5 against, and 5 abstentions, the motion passes. Sorry, I forgot abstentions were a thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Point of information.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
Historically, our rules have been questionable on that. Could we get an interpretation from the central office about whether the burden has been met?
Yeah, can you tell me what the where our vote count is?
Currently, our present account is 20 members, simple majority being 11 and 2/3 being 14.
So you need 11 votes, so this motion does fail.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. You can call for a revote. Okay.
Point of information.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
Could you specify the rules regarding bringing legislation back to the floor that has failed a vote?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Chairperson Bobbitt. So when legislation fails, and we'll still go to a revote in a second, but just give me a second. So when legislation fails, legislation can be resubmitted to the body on a similar topic, but it has to be changed to a certain degree, which is up to interpretation to the body and also the speaker itself. But I'd love to also get Advisor Fonseca's feedback too on historical, like that happening within other sessions of legislation being changed, because I know for a fact, in my experience, that has to be changed to a certain degree, but that's up to interpretation. So if you could share a little bit on that.
Yeah, there are 2 ways to do it. One is the Senate option of division of the House, or division of the Assembly, which basically means you're asking at the moment, before we move on to the next item, to ask for a re-vote. The second option is if that fails, any bill that fails in the Senate can't be reintroduced in the same capacity. It has to stand a test that the court has established, a test that says it has to be different enough for the bill to be reintroduced to the Senate. And that was a court case that was ruled on several years ago that we've continued to utilize as with any bills that have failed. Resolutions or anything requires something that's different enough to be submitted, and it could be challenged in the court if it's not different enough.
Chairperson Bobbitt.
Point of information. What is the voting criteria to re-vote? Or essentially, what's the voting criteria to invoke option A?
From what I'm reading here, someone makes a motion, it has to be seconded, it's not debatable, it's not amendable, and it looks like, from what I just read, it looks like just a simple majority to do so.
Chairperson Haynes.
Point of inquiry about the division of the House thing. Is it true that it has to, for those who don't know what that means, is it true that it doesn't have, that the person making the motion for the division of the House has to be on the prevailing side. So in this case, people that voted no or abstained would have to make that motion? Question mark?
Prevailing would mean that they'd be on the vote on yes, so it has to be on the opposite side. So not of the prevailing, but whatever the opposite of prevailing, which I can't think of that word right now. But it has to be someone who voted no, not an abstention. It has to be someone who voted no to call the vote, and you can't ask to say to prove it. So like if I think you weren't on the if I think you voted yes, I can't ask you to prove it unless you challenge the whole voting record to pull it, which becomes really messy. So it has to be someone on the no side to make the motion to do it.
Thank you. That's what I meant.
Do I have any other questions before I open the floor to motions? Okay. Are there any motions? It seems like we have some questions. So when I asked you all if you had questions and you didn't raise your hand, please do so now. Senator Pizzini.
So can anyone just, oh no, it has to be someone who voted no to call the revote, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for that clarification. Do I have a motion on the floor? Seeing no motion, we'll move forward with our agenda items as such. So, we move to 6.3. Act on request, whoever. Act on request to approve AR-67-017, accommodations and professor accountability.
In committee, we changed to add language stating that in the line items 82 through 89, to add the addition that while we do recommend students to use platforms like Rate My Professor, these third-party websites will not be used in evaluations made by the committee. Furthermore, students are advised to use the accessibility report form for reporting issues related to accommodations. Failures as reported does not go to OSAP, as well as the addition that the association calls the university to address current training methods, particularly regarding the removal of most of the disability training services sections in the current training given to professors, as it used to be like 30 minutes of a section, and now it's like 1 minute to like 3. Just to ensure that we have knowledge about why those sections were cut for time or what that process was like. Those are the changes we made. I'm open to questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. This is this bill's second read. Is there any debate on this item? I'll say quickly, I think this is a beautiful thing. I think it's incredibly necessary. I think as a student with a disability myself, it's incredibly difficult to get accommodations and also to seek and have that accountability for professors, because there is no structure after they say no, really. It's just oh my gosh, what do we do next? What 1,000 people do I email now? Do I email like 10 people now to make sure that I get my accommodations? The answer is yes, you have to, because you have to be your own advocate, as was stated earlier. This is incredibly necessary. I think this is a beautiful thing. I think Chairperson Adriana Owens has done their due diligence when it comes to really reaching out to faculty and faculty senate and those kinds of services in order to get their feedback on this too. I think this is well researched and it's beautifully done. So I will vote in favor of it. I urge you to do so as well. Senator Pizzini.
I want to just speak in affirmation. Yesterday, I spoke to one of my constituents, just out of the blue, and he was an adult learner with accommodations. And one of the first things he mentioned to me was that he had a problem having one of his professors actually give him his accommodations, so they wouldn't send his exams to the testing center like they refused. So because of this legislation And having read it and been there when it was going through its, like, birth, I was able to give him a little bit of information and just let him know that he would have to advocate for himself. So I believe that it's very necessary, and it's happening a lot more than we think. And students need to know that that end of semester survey is really, we don't know what happens to it. And I think Annie's gone. The undergraduate advocate actually mentioned it earlier. We don't know what happens to those surveys. Do they have to be seen by someone? Are they reviewed? Who are they reviewed by? So don't let that it's not like a safety blanket. People think they'll just give their opinion at the end and maybe something will change. You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to be really kind of informed. So I'm glad that this is on the floor, and I will happily vote for it.
Senator Murphy.
I'd like to motion to adopt by unanimous consent.
Beautiful. We can do that. Are there any objections to approving this legislation through unanimous consent? Seeing none, it's adopted as such. Yes, thank you. That reminds me, we're to act on request to approve SB-67-174, organizational funding for Iranian Student Association. Remember, we took that off of the consent agenda to be considered in the new business, but it is deemed timely, so this will be the first and final read. Is the author here and would like to speak? You have the floor.
Before the author speaks, may I make a motion?
I would allow that. Chairperson Bobbitt, what's your motion?
I am going to request that we table this until the next meeting of the Senate. It's a nitty-gritty issue, and I don't know if the Senate has the capacity to deal with it tonight.
I'm going to act within my authority of speaker and decline that motion, say it's out of order. The author is here and would like to speak, and you do have the floor.
Hi everyone, I'll make this quick. This is Iranian Student Association's second request, and because of that, they've already spent a little bit of the $3,000 that they were allowed to spend for this fiscal year. So actually, the bill that you see, that number is how much they can spend after I reimburse all their receipts and everything after their first request. For this one, this second request, they're asking for these funds to actually celebrate Persian New Year, and their total was actually $4,566.81, but because of that limit, they were only given I think about 1,500-ish amount. They'll be using this to book the actual event place, as well as food for about 70 guests, the catering that is associated with that, as well as some music, mixers, DJs, things like that. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Senator Island?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could provide us with any insight specifically regarding why there was a request to not pass this through the consent agenda?
I did not pull that out, so I can't answer that question.
Later, I presume in the debating period, that answer will be answered. That question will be answered. Any other question? Seeing none, thank you very much. And thank you for staying so long. Is there any debate on this item? Chairperson Bobbitt.
Dr. Fonseca, will you please do your part of it, and then I will take it over?
Thank you all for staying so long.
Okay, so the question that the Senate must answer tonight is whether or not the nature of the expenditure is in violation of this section of the bylaws. So because there is such a large discrepancy between the amount that the event costs and the amount that we have the ability to allocate, the organization in question indicated that they would supplement the difference through not fundraising, but charging admission to the event. And I want to be explicitly clear, not speaking on behalf of Finance Commission, simply reporting the conversation that did occur in the Finance Commission. So if I slip up, please know that that is my intent. The Finance Commission, when this was discussed, put it forward with the stipulation that no student should be charged for the event if it's being SGA funded. And then a kind of secondary quandary that was asked was even if the money is being used to fund the event itself, does that still count under the fundraising prohibition? And does it count as raising material support for the organization? Yeah, so it's not future fundraising, but they still are raising funds for the organization to pay for the event.
Any other debate on this item? Senator Mallard.
With that point, it's also, if they say that they might do it, we don't actually know if they will do it. And if they don't do it, then they wouldn't be in violation. And if they do it, then we can file a case against them. And then that would put them in a harder place for next semester and hurt them even more than it would if we wouldn't give them this. And so I think that, and I completely agree with what you're saying. I think that we should also consider the fact that they might not, and if we tell them that they can't, again, just to ensure. But I think that we should not vote based off of what ifs.
I have a question for clarification for Treasurer Wong. So in the event that a entity that receives funding through this process is found in violation because they did technically violate this section of the bylaws, what would be the next steps on that side after, like on the other side of the aisle after it's passed, in terms of would they be in violation of something? Would they be in not good standing, or kind of what would be the next step?
So for me, what happens with organizational funding is that students will spend the dollars first, and then they will give me the receipts. I will verify the receipts that everything is within the list or not within the list of prohibited expenditures, so everything that clears policy. And then if anything else, I will also ask clarifying questions after. So in this case, I would ask, did you charge students or did you charge members to go to this event? I guess my interpretation of this language is that they are fundraising for the event, but not necessarily for the organization itself. So I would allow the receipts to pass through. If Senate does not want me to do that, then you would need to stipulate that in the bill, which I think was what Senator Bobbitt was trying to get at. But to me, at this point, I would not reject the receipts based off of the highlighted bylaw language, based on my interpretation of it.
Thank you so much. Any other debate on this item? Chairperson Bobbitt.
May I ask the opinion of the central office as to whether or not they deem this to be a violation?
You may.
I think I'd have to agree with the treasurer that it'd be dependent on what they ultimately do with the funding. If the funding is approved, right, I think there's a difference between holding an organization accountable for having done it. But if ultimately the information that we collect or advertising we have doesn't charge students for it, then I don't, if they don't charge them for a ticket or something to get into an event, I think it'd have to be dependent on if the organization did do this and violated and the treasurer found it a violation, then they just won't get reimbursed for it. So I think what's tricky is being able to hold them accountable prior to them actually attempting to do it. I would definitely say that this is some language that should probably be cleared up a little bit more to understand the application to it. That's kind of my opinion on that at the moment.
Senator Hatch.
Stay with me here. Can we include language that basically says if they receive enough funding from tickets and stuff, that we reduce the allocation to the point where they are not basically fundraising for future events, like basically get them to net zero after the ticket sales?
Okay, that's a complicated question. I would say my advice to you all would be, if you want to make sure that these tickets don't pass through if they are fundraising in the sense that they are charging like a ticket price for students who are attending the event, then you need to change that language to do so. But I urge you all to not alter much beyond that, because you still can. But I urge you all to have a little bit more discussion on if that's something that's even necessary, because from general sentiment of nods throughout the body, I'm seeing that people are okay, potentially, are generally okay with this passing without any amendments to it. But I want more thought on that before we do. So hold on to that for a second. Let at least one or two people speak, and then we'll get back to what you said. Is that fair? Unless you have a motion right now.
I don't have a motion right now. I was kind of asking if we could do that from the treasurer, if that's even an option.
I mean, y'all are Senate. I'm not going to be, like, realistically, what am I going to say? No. It's my preference that this just pass as is, since it's been legislated and the policy is already there. Just putting on top of it, like, I guess, a policy stating kind of in a roundabout way the same exact policy that was up there and highlighted seems redundant to me. And so it's my preference that this passes just as is, but obviously y'all can have that discussion.
Before we get to Senator Mallard, I'll say my opinion of this, and my opinion when I personally was sitting in the room when we were having this discussion, was I don't really care if I care if they charge, because to me, that's in violation of their funding policies if they're using their funds to propagate their organization. I have the exact same sentiment that Treasurer Wong has about the funding processes and procedures, so I have no problem passing it as is and allowing the treasurer to do their job at their discretion based on the bylaws. I'm comfortable with that. But it was general sentiment of, I think, that we pass this and potentially see if that's something that we don't want to do. Do we want to ensure that they're not having ticket sales, not charging people, because then it'd be in violation. I don't know. My urge is to pass this as is without any amendments, but I'd love more thoughts. Senator Mallard. Oh, Senator, would you like? Okay, Senator Pizzini.
I was just wondering if the organization is very clear on what the rule is. Was it communicated to them that if they charge for the ticket, they cannot take this funding? Are they clear?
May I answer that?
Oh, of course.
So when every organization, and this also includes individual funding, they basically check a box that says I've read all the rules. And so technically they should be aware. Now, you know, we're all humans, so sometimes we don't actually read the rules, and I do have to clarify with some organizations or individuals after the fact, but I will always communicate that after the fact and make sure that they know either if a receipt was rejected, why that receipt was rejected, or if I've accepted a receipt, how much was accepted and how much will be reimbursed into their safekeeping account. They'll never be left in the dark. Suddenly they just have like no dollars shown up in their bank account, or like $1,000 just show up. They will always be in the know, and I always do my best to be communicative with them and try to explain. There are times where I have to meet with them in person, just because trying to explain all this over email can be really complicated, and it just doesn't have the nuance that like an in-person, face-to-face conversation would have. And so I do my best to communicate everything that I need to those organizations or those individuals.
Senator Mallard?
I think we're delving into this way too much. We've approved funding bills in the past, and we've not debated it like this. This is not that hard. There's already a policy in place that states if they're in violation and the treasurer deems it necessary, then they will not get the money. And respectfully, I believe that the treasurer has more say and more thought and knowledge on this than the senators who have never even served on appropriations. And I think we just need to vote on this because there's rules in place. We do not need to make amendments. We do not need to do any of that. We just need to vote. If they're in violation, they don't get the money. If they're not, then they get the money.
I'll allow one more person to speak before I move to previous question and I end this and move. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Seeing none. We'll move to the debating period. Nope, the voting period on this item.
Voting is now open. With 15 in favor, 0 against, and 2 abstentions, the motion passes.
Yeah, I won't ask for much more. Vice President Fawn.
I move to extend the meeting to 11 p.m.
Seeing a second. This is not debatable. We'll move into voting on this item. This does not mean we have to go till 11. It just means we have a little bit of time just in case, so.
Voting is now open. With 14 in favor, 3 against, and 0 abstentions, the motion passes.
Okay, we're moving to act on request to approve AR-67-0119, condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Is the author here and would like to speak? You have the floor.
So I'll keep this short. The current Russian government is bad. What it's doing is bad, and I'm pretty sure. I think the university should say that what the current Russian government is doing is bad, and that Ukraine, which is fighting the Russian government, is good, and that is good. It's good for Ukraine to fight the current Russian government. And given the current U.S. administration's floppiness, I think it's good to have the university say that what Ukraine is doing is good. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. This will go to the Diversity, Empowerment, and Inclusion Committee next week. Nope, the week after. Now we move to 7.2, act on request to approve AR-67-020, diversity training. The author is here and would like to speak. You have the floor.
So we've all taken our Title IX training. We know where that is on the MyWSU website. Apparently, the university already has a diversity training program, but I have no clue where that is. I don't know if any of you know where that is. It would be good to put that training next to the Title IX training. so that if people want to learn more about the university's minority populations, they can do it easily right next to the other training.
Are there any questions? Beautiful. Seeing none, this will go to the DEI committee. That moves us to, oh no, I scrolled all the way to the bottom. Moves to giving it to Vice President Fawn, since this is my legislation.
All right, we will now move to 7.3, act on request to approve SB-67-176, changing the attendance policy. The author has the floor.
Hello. I think we're seeing evidently that the interim policy that we have that I changed, yay, pending constitutional amendment approval, yay, also left us in a place where we have very few senators. We're seeing not only very few senators, but also a lack of attendance in committees and those kinds of things, which makes it incredibly hard to get legislative business done and completed, and also to even feel like this is a real Senate, because when people aren't here, it's like, what are we doing? This bill is just amending the bylaws to change the attendance policy so that people can't misuse the system. A couple years ago, they changed the attendance policy, and by they I mean another session, changed the attendance policy and removed the speaker's inherent ability to deny excuse form requests, which technically means that right now within our bylaws, I can't deny any excusal requests. This would change that because I think that's silly funny. And it would also make it so that the 3 excused absences are like, hey, that's it, then you're out. But also that there would be 3 unexcused absences equals 1, wait, what? 3 excused absences equals 1 unexcused absence. When you get to 3, you're gone. So that would give you a little bit of leniency in terms of like how many you're able to miss within discretion there. And also states that classwork or other prior commitments do not count as excused absences because, hey, you signed up for this job. You know what time we are. We've been the same time for what, decades? Same time. So if you have class, maybe you're not a senator. I'm going to be blunt. You knew what you were signing up for this exact time. And if you have class, that's fine. Academic obligations, do that. Maybe this just can't be for you anymore. You know? I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. Additionally, so if you have prior commitments, you have an activity or those kinds of things, they meet on Wednesdays, you know what you're signing up. And there are people within this body who have not been here at all this session and get to claim them as a senator, who will probably go to the banquet and be like, yeah, I served as a senator. Did you? I don't really think so. Because to me, that's not fulfilling your duties and responsibilities, but because of sessions previous, they took my ability to yank them out. So I want to bring that back. Bring back accountability. Yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Chairperson Bobbitt.
So within the bill, chapter 1, section 1, 3B says 3 unexcused absences from meetings will subject a senator to the membership review board. Are you seeking to reverse the policy changes that we made earlier, or was that just
No, that's a snafu with that not being updated in the bylaws. So that'll be changed accordingly in legislative affairs.
Does anyone have any more questions? Sarah Lewis. Does anyone have any more questions? Chairperson Haynes.
Yeah, I remember we talked about something in legislative affairs about how odd it is where like if you miss like a week of Senate, those are your 3 absences already done. Would you be, or I guess would whatever committee, would you be like amenable to changing that? So like if you miss a day of Senate, that's just your 1 absence as opposed to the 3?
Yes, fantastic point. So in legislative affairs, when we talk about this, I will have an amendment proposed to do exactly that. That's a great point to bring up too. We had a discussion to ensure that senators, if they miss committee, and, committee of the whole and Senate, they wouldn't be accruing 3 absences as they do on our current system. We'd make it so it would be just 1. So it's like for each calendar day. Yeah.
Does anyone have any additional questions? Chairperson Owens?
Could you go into like maybe the details of, for example, if someone, the speaker, decides to say, okay, they made an excuse form, I'm not going to accept this. If that certain senator wanted to appeal that decision of the speaker, what would that process look like? Who would it go to? Would it be the membership review board? Would it be the advocate? What's the process like? Do we need to change that? That sounded like a lot of questions. What would the appeal process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. As it sits now, since the speaker can't deny any of those requests, it'd be up to the subjection of the membership review board, Gabe, correct me if I'm wrong, to process any of those types of things beyond that. Great discussion there. And also additional thoughts there for the membership review board. If people have problems with like one absence or any absences not being excused or stuff, that is something they can bring up to the membership review board whenever they get to the, if they are brought up to the membership review board. But yeah, let's go to Advisor Fonseca. Tell me how it was before they changed this.
Advisor Fonseca?
Yeah, anything appeal related would, prior to when they had numbers for when the speaker could deny appeals or could deny absences, they were able to appeal that to the court. So the court deals with all types of appeals. If it went into a membership review board hearing, because they hit the 3, they went to that process in the old process, they could attempt to get it appealed there too. But most every appeal, we would encourage all members of student government. The court is the body that deals with appeals and can override any decisions or sustain any decisions as well.
It's the court, to answer your question.
Are there any additional questions? Chairperson Owens?
I'm so sorry. Just quick question. If this hypothetically were to pass and now it's in the speaker's right to deny like excuses, if someone, hypothetically, I were to submit an excuse form and it was denied, would that then denial be sent back to the person so that they know it was denied? And would it be through email or would it go through Shocker's sync?
So first part of that, when the speaker denies it, that goes straight to their email. Second part of that, when they go to appeals to the court will give them their decision through their email, their student email. So they'd get that decision and then that would be a confirmation that it was denied. Also, side note, another part I wanted to bring up also with this piece of legislation is amorphous senator a few sessions ago created a sabbatical for senators in the case that they needed to take a leave of absence from the Senate for any reason, grief, disability, health issues, those kinds of things. With the attendance policy that it currently sits at, that policy kind of was a moot point because nobody needed to use it because then they just submit an excuse form every single week, and that's fine, which I find kind of silly because the whole point was to make sure senators had that option for when they're struggling and are on hard times, created an entire process for it, and then that was just like entirely didn't get used, obviously, because people would just then use the excuse form as a, hey, I'm not going to be here, and then they keep doing it every single week. So that was another point.
Are there any additional questions? Sarah Lewis.
Okay, for real this time. So in Chapter 1, Section 1, 3C, why must there be automatic conversion of excused absences to unexcused absences if you can just deny excuses if somebody is abusing the system.
Can you ask that again? Because I kind of understood it, but I want to make sure I really get it.
If you can deny excuses when people are abusing the excuse system, why should there be an automatic conversion of excused absences to unexcused absences?
That's a good question. I think simply put that missing a certain amount of meetings kind of puts you in the place where you're not necessarily fulfilling your duties as a senator, and would place you kind of in the area where you need to go and look at potentially getting a sabbatical. The point was there that if you have, let's say you're sick, and you're like, I have been sick for 9 weeks of Senate, that would bring you again to the 3 unexcused absences and would take you out of the Senate. For this piece of legislation, it was about how do we not only ensure that senators are fulfilling their obligations and responsibilities of the Senate to the Senate for the students, also ensuring that there are mechanisms for students in case they are ill, have hospitalizations, if they are grieving or any of those things, have that avenue of sabbaticals. And how do we ensure that those sabbaticals are good and necessary? And I additionally think so missing so many Senate sessions to me puts you at a point where you're not fulfilling your duties and obligations. So I thought it was necessary to do that system. Additionally, so the system isn't like abnormal. It exists in other organizations as well, and other like systems too. I've been in organizations where they do this kind of system anyway, but it puts a max there of people will know how many they can realistically miss without being in a situation where they're, going to be removed. To me, without a max, it still brings it into the point of people misusing the system, depending on who sits in the speakership. I would rather have that capped, personally.
Are there any final questions? Seeing none, thank you. This legislation will be, a question, sir? I'll allow this one last question. Okay, go ahead.
Kind of on Senator Lewis's train of thought, I was wondering if you would be amenable to that conversion being at the discretion of the speaker at that point, just so it is still in place, but for unique situations that we can maybe talk about. I don't know. Just unique situations that could arise that would cause someone to not want to go on sabbatical, but also maybe accrue a large number of absences.
I understand your thought process. I don't agree that that should be a reason to amend the legislation or change it. Simply put, if you have a reason that you have to miss Senate sessions, and you are not comfortable with sabbaticals, that's something you can discuss with the speaker, but to me, that 9 is where I personally would draw the line of, I don't think you're fulfilling your responsibilities and duties as a senator no longer. And if you have an abject reason to be missing Senate, I guess the question would be, why are you not comfortable taking a sabbatical when that's exactly what it's for? Additionally, I don't want to legislate for hypotheticals and for a hypothetical person that doesn't exist who might not be comfortable with sabbaticals, because I don't see a reality where I see people who wouldn't be comfortable with a sabbatical when it's a 30-day period. What, 30-day period? Less than a month period where you can miss Senate meetings, and it is built in for people in those unique situations to exist. To me, I think it is good and necessary to have a max, to say you can miss this many Senate sessions before you have to be removed from your position. Because as it sits right now, people are misusing that system. And sure, it can be up to the discretion of the speaker. It is up to the discretion of the speaker to see if it's unexcused or excused, to see if that reason is good or bad. I personally think that that max needs to stay. But I'd love to have further conversations with you about that, and maybe even Senator Lewis too, if those are conversations you'd like to continue, and if we can meet in the middle somewhere with that. But as it sits now, I'd like it to stay.
Okay, any final questions? Okay, thank you. This legislation will be referred to Legislative Affairs, and I will hand the chair back to Speaker Owens.
I'm adjourning this meeting at 10:37 p.m. We'll meet back here March 26th.